Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for braving the weather today to be here at the first day of our Trustees Conference. For those of you that have been to many conferences, thank you for coming back. And for those your first time, we really hope that you enjoy it. We took your feedback from last year's conference and tried to make allowances for some suggestions that you had. We kept you pretty busy last time at the last year Trustees Conference. We had suggestions for more networking. And because of that, Inter-University Council and Ohio Association of Community Colleges under leadership, the IUC's under the leadership of Bruce Johnson, and the AACC's under the leadership of Jack Hershey are sponsoring a reception tonight. So I would like to thank Jack and Bruce and all their members for making that possible. Let's give them a big hand. I also want to thank President Harrison for allowing us to use this facility. We found it to be centrally located and the accommodations to be very good, and we really appreciate it. We have many meetings here, and the generosity of Columbus State to cooperate with us is very much appreciated. Also, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our regents. And if I could have our regents stand up. The Board of Regents is an advisory board to the Board of Regents, the agency. And they do a lot of heavy lifting, including the conditions report that everybody's involved with and that we're implementing through some policies at the agency, as well as you'll see some of those recommendations in the budget. And they're getting ready to begin. It's kind of like the elves on the North Pole. Once they're done with that report, they get to start again. And we have Tom Humphreys as a regent from Northeast Ohio, Youngstown area, Elizabeth Kessler from Central Ohio, Virginia Linseth, Mrs. Virginia Linseth from Northeast Ohio, Lana Moreski, who's our vice chairman from Northeast Ohio, and Kurt Kaufman from West Central Ohio. So let's give them a big hand for their. And I encourage you to visit with them and talk about what you're doing on your campuses, because that's what we want to hear about more as we proceed with policies. I also want to thank the Board of Regents staff. I don't see Charles. Charles C's in the back. He's the person that worries about getting everybody here, making sure all the speakers are here, and making sure that we're here on time. And Charles and all the Board of Regents staff that's here, I'd like to thank you. We'll recognize them again tomorrow. But I was just in a meeting with the governor about higher education, and the governor is very full throttle on higher education and its connections to workforce and moving our state forward. So he's very interested in what's going to be happening here today and your partnership. And as you know, the governor is keenly interested in the people that are appointed to the boards. He feels that the role of the boards of the trustees at the institutions is very important, and that without their leadership, we're not going to be successful in our mission. So thank you. At this time, I believe, Bruce, you're going to have a few words. Thank you, and look forward to spending time with you during this conference.
Thanks, John. I just want to thank the Chancellor for arranging the trustee conference this year and his staff. And I also want to say we're looking forward to seeing you at the reception. We represent Ohio's 14 public universities, and we have a very close partnership with the Ohio Association of Community Colleges now and Jack Hershey, and we're looking forward to pulling together on behalf of all of higher education so that the people of the state of Ohio can thrive. And when I say that, I mean, you know, Lumina and all those big foundations, they say that we need to have at least 60% of everybody between the ages of 25 and 65 have some sort of college education, either a certificate or a degree, associate's degree or baccalaureate degree or above, by 2025. And currently the state has 42%. So we have to be hitting on all cylinders, all sectors, everybody working together in order to achieve that goal. And that goal will serve all the people of the state of Ohio, not just those who are directly engaged in the higher education enterprise. So on behalf of the universities, speaking to trustees, I would say this. When we advocate, We advocate for your leadership. We advocate for local control, and we advocate for strong leadership at the local level on behalf of the universities and the community colleges. So welcome to this Trustees Conference. We look forward to great things from you. Now I'll introduce my partner that I almost forgot, Jack Hershey from the Ohio Association of Community Colleges.
Thanks, Bruce. I also want to thank the Chancellor and his staff for putting this together. I think this is always kind of a nice event in the yearly schedule because it's the one time that I know of where the leadership from both sectors gets to come together and compare notes and learn together. And you know, under these 4 years, under this governor, collaboration has been the theme, and it's probably at a higher level than we've ever seen. You know, together, those of you in the university world are training people for the jobs of tomorrow. We in the community college sector are training people for the jobs of today, and together we provide the workforce for Ohio to help it lead and grow. So I hope this is going to be a great conference. We're looking forward to it. I have to recognize my chairman over there, Dee Talmadge, because she's paying for the reception tonight. She doesn't know it yet. She's been a fantastic leader for us. Thank you, Mr. Chancellor.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you all your members for being part of this. Our next panel is going to be our first panel is going to be the panel on fiduciary responsibility. And while they're coming forward, I want to thank our state auditor, Dave Yost, is here today. Congratulate him on his re-election. And I also want to mention my former colleague from both the House and the Senate, Ray Miller. And I appreciate his service as well, and it's always good to see a familiar face.
I'll be right there. I'll get settled in. Come on, Sally. Good afternoon on this snowy day in Columbus. I'm glad that I flew in yesterday. I have a couple of colleagues from the Association of Governing Boards who were leaving Washington, D.C. this morning, and their flight to Columbus was canceled. One of them will still be able to make it, fortunately, and one will not, but we have workarounds. I am Sheila Stearns, retired as Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Montana, where I served in that role for 10 years with our Board of Regents. Prior to that, was president of Wayne State College in Northeast Nebraska. Prior to that, was chancellor of the University of Montana Western, and prior to that, served as a vice president of the University of Montana. So my roots are, as you might imagine, took me back to Montana, so I'm from Missoula. I noticed on the TV this morning on the Weather Channel, they're calling this winter storm Bozeman. A lot of you know there's a Bozeman, Montana. In fact, Paula asked me about Bozeman today, and have they started taking to naming winter storms, I guess? And I think that's sort of interesting if so. We are the panel, as you can see, that will be talking about fiduciary responsibilities. But before we start, I just want to say on behalf of the Association of Governing Boards, our president, Rick Ligon, would be on this panel, and you can see his name on your program. He is the one whose flight got canceled. So we have asked our good colleague, Sally Clausen, who will deliver the keynote tomorrow and who will chair or moderate the panel that will follow this one. So you'll get to know Sally with her wonderful sort of soft Louisiana way of speaking here in a little bit. The Association of Governing Boards truly recommends these kinds of sessions and summits as good practice, if not best practice. And I was glad to hear you say, Chancellor Carey, about the request for networking, because what we have found around the country, and our colleague George Pernsteiner sends his regards and respects for you for doing this, because not every state is having these sessions, sponsoring these sessions. And they clearly end up making a difference to the quality of governance, which ends up making a difference to the quality of your colleges and universities. So thank you for that. And I have to add my personal thanks to Charles for all of the arrangements, including finding me over at the hotel via phone where I was wandering around, wondering where the meeting was. And he said, you need to come a few blocks over here. So thank you for attending to so many details for all of us, Charles. Now, the Fiduciary Responsibilities Panel, I'm sure that many of you I've talked to, I circulated, and some of you, like Margaret, have been on the job as a trustee for all of about 3 or 4 months, and some of you have been on, like Paula, for quite a few years. So your experience is a range. And where's Richard? Richard told me he's been doing this kind of thing for about 20 years, or since 1983, right? So some of you have a great deal of experience. It doesn't matter, I have found, how much we all have something to learn. So I would like to introduce my panel. Their bios are in the programs, and so I'll just tell you quickly. I mentioned Sally, and she has a great background. You can find that, and she'll be introduced when she speaks next. And you know Jeff Clark. He's right from here, the Attorney General's office. Our program says he's a Principal Assistant Attorney General. And if we could have, Brent, the first slide put up of Jeff's slide, we won't have it go through them until Jeff is ready. But Jeff has prepared some slides for our panel. One back from that. There we go. Certainly a part of fiduciary responsibilities, as many of you know, is letting the sun shine in, and he will speak to that. And our third panelist we're very pleased to have is Dave Yost. Many of you know, recently reelected as state auditor, and congratulations. I heard the chancellor also congratulate you. And my privilege was to visit with each of these folks in advance and to learn about their particular window into the entity that constitutes fiduciary responsibility. So before I turn it over to them, let me just mention that our goals, as it says here in the program, is to get at the heart both of what all of us typically think of as fiduciary responsibility. That has to do with fiscal and ethical and legal matters. But in the context of the university and the academy, it also has a range of meaning, which Sally will help touch upon. And then our goals will be to talk about that both with each other, with you, and then to allow, I hope, about 20 minutes for questions and answers from you. So make notes. And frankly, I don't think any of us mind seeing a hand go up during this and saying, well, what did you mean by that? It might put us slightly off our game, but I don't think so. I think that'll liven things up. So we should have Q&A at the end, but make sure that if you would like to clarify something that you are welcome to jump in and do that. I'll just tell you one of the fun things that happened for me was in preparing for this that Dave Yost told me about one of his favorite books. And it's called The 7 Signs of Ethical Collapse in Organizations, something like that, by a lawyer, business professor named Mary Ann Jennings. And I was telling my colleague Sally that as soon as he told me about it, I downloaded it on my Kindle, thinking that, another one of those books, I'll get to it eventually. Well, my husband and I had a little trip to Nashville, and we were last week going to Grand Ole Opry, all kind of things, and he said, tear yourself away from that book. We have some things to do here while we're in this city that we are not we don't get to visit very often. It is fascinating. And it gives good signs, it gives good antidotes to behavior that is not fiduciarily responsible. It gives red flags, many of which don't have to do so much with colleges and universities. But what I found, and he'll mention, we are not immune. We in the nonprofit, the NGO world, are not immune from challenges when it comes to fiduciary responsibility. So with that, it'll seem a little piecemeal until I'm sure in some way we all will pull it together at the end and have questions and answers. But I did want to see if I can just see what Enron, what Ken Lay said to his board and to the press about Enron. If I can't find it now, I'll come back to it. Oh, here we go. He said this, by the way, if you recall, it fell apart in 2001. And I was in Nebraska, where Enron originally started, and so many of my friends and colleagues frankly lost pension funds to Enron. So this really caught my eye. He articulated Enron's ethical principles with this quote in 1999. Employees of Enron Corporation and its subsidiaries and all affiliated companies are charged with conducting their business affairs in accordance with the highest standards. An employee shall not conduct him or herself in a manner which directly or indirectly would be detrimental to the best interests of the company, or in a manner that would bring the employee financial gain, et cetera, et cetera. And it goes on, and you think, you know, what happened? Well, that's what we're talking about just a little bit with this panel, what kinds of things can happen, but how this can also be positive for your college, your university, your boards of regents. So I'm going to start with Jeff Clark. And Jeff, you can use this. I think it's probably a little easier for people to see, and then we'll use those microphones for Q&A.
Thank you, Sheila. As somebody who litigates and writes and teaches in the area of public access, it struck me as a particularly good fit to talk about fiduciary responsibilities, because we start off our training almost every time reading a quote that the Supreme Court uses over again from a 1960 case, and it begins this way: the rule in Ohio is that public records are the people's records, and that the officials in whose custody they happen to be are merely trustees for the people. So fiduciary responsibility in this case, you have many responsibilities to the same groups and in the context of your colleges and for the state as regents. But you actually have a fiduciary responsibility to all of the people of Ohio, and indeed anybody who's interested in your operations, with respect to public records. So how do you make that happen? How do you satisfy those responsibilities? Well, we talk in our training about a recipe for success that, if you follow it, is almost guaranteed to keep you out of trouble, and also almost guaranteed to give you good press, good recognition from the people you interact with in public access. Understand the law, and for that we have trainings that my office has put together, and that the Auditor of State's office and we deliver around the state for free in various locations. We have a manual, the Sunshine Laws Manual, which is available for free on our website, the auditor's website. You can order paper copies if you're of my generation, like paper in your hands. And look at our videos on our website. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities to understand how to do public access law correctly. And then, and this seems axiomatic, but you have to follow the law. And as we'll see in one example we give in a later slide, not everybody does that. But if you do it, you are going to be way ahead. But beyond that, and this is how people get kudos in newspaper and other coverage, is to go above and beyond the law. And we give examples in our trainings of how people might do that in a way that not only satisfies requesters better and makes them look better, but actually reduces the burden on the public office. So you can actually make things easier on yourself with some of these techniques, one of which is negotiating satisfaction. So it never hurts to ask, how you can do things better, what somebody really wants. There's some negotiation built into the Public Records Act. Some of it's mandatory, some of it's optional. And when you understand that, and I'm sure some of you have backgrounds in mediation and negotiation of various sorts, you can really make things hum along for you in this area. And then finally, and this is the lawyer talking, you document all that good work that you do, so that if you do get sued or get in some kind of trouble, you have a lay down hand as to how you were doing things right.
Jeff, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to ask a question,
Sure.
even right now. If you back up to the last slide, Would you elaborate just a hair on negotiate satisfaction?
Sure. When somebody asks for records in a way that seems insane or overly broad, to use the language of the statute, ambiguous in a way that you can't really tell which records they're asking for, you can deny the request, but you have to explain to them how you organize and maintain your records. Well, if you dig into that with them and say, please give me a call. And there's a celebrated case, one of mine, that's why it's celebrated, out of Columbus State
At least you
Community
celebrate
College.
it.
Pardon?
You celebrated.
Yeah, well, yeah. Where somebody made such a request, we invited them, the legal counsel for Columbus State Community College invited them over and over again to come in and talk about it, and they insisted on suing instead, and they lost. And part of what the court noted was that the community college had been bending over backwards trying to do the right thing. It's one of the reasons that they won. So that in that case, the person didn't take advantage of it, but if they had, then you get to talk about what it is that the law actually provides for them to ask, so you can narrow them down into what they're permitted to do, while still saying, how can we get you to where you want to be in terms of the information or the records or whatever it is that you want. By the way, my office takes calls. We can only act as counsel, and actually very fortunately in this case to state agencies, so you are our clients. But we're happy to talk to you or your legal counsel about how to handle these things. And we always often say, do consult your legal counsel early and often, and they can consult us, because all of my colleagues at any rate would rather be a fence at the top of the cliff than your ambulance at the bottom. So please get in touch with all of us. So having documented your efforts along those lines and others in compliance, you should be in good shape and be doing the right thing by your fiduciary duties to the state and to the country. These are just some examples of how complex exceptions can be, and you do have some juveniles in your systems. There are exemptions from the Public Records Act for juveniles, as well as some that extend past juveniles to adults, such as student information, FERPA, and its related statutes. We gather all of that stuff, and again, you can find in what we call the Yellow Book some references to all of that. We note what it is exactly you're required to do as far as keeping and maintaining records, and you probably have experienced and expert staff who deal with your records retention. And this is some other resources. One of the reasons we wanted to give you slides is so you didn't have to look this up again. But the Ohio Historical Center, I believe it's been recently renamed, but their state archivists and assistant archivists are happy to help you as well, particularly with records retention questions. And another one that everybody is interested in, and I assume you are too, is what to do with those darned electronic records. Well, there is a committee. It's not a commission. It's not a state organization. You'll notice it's got a .org after it. It's not a government association, but a lot of public offices belong to it, including mine, and they get together and try to develop best practices for dealing with electronic records, whether it's your hard drive or your email, your social media, and they post their guidances, their guidelines in those areas on this website, and they're constantly updating them. So a great resource and a good place to start. Sheila had asked to talk about some things, since we only have a short amount of time. What's most serious? What do you most need to know? Well, the recipe for success is great, but I told you some people don't follow the law. What are some of the things that get people in trouble most often? Well, if you get a public records request, particularly a large one, and don't respond to it for weeks, months at a time, it may be that it takes that long to process the request. There's a lot of good reasons why it can take time to retrieve, examine, redact, copy, and so forth something. And if you save it all up until one big response 2 months later, they may sue you on the week before that. And if you had just stayed in touch with them, if you had just given them a quick receipt letter when you got the request saying, got your request, we understand it, and we'll be responding within a reasonable period of time, it settles them down, it satisfies them. Invite them to contact you if they have any questions, or if they haven't heard from you for a while. That will take care of a lot of things. It's a mistake not to do it. Not denying an ambiguous or overly broad request. Remember, I said that you can deny a request and then have to explain how you organize your records. While not denying the request in the first place can lead to some hideous, and again, I speak from experience here, hideous conditions for a client who's trying to satisfy a request that they really cannot understand. It's a catch-22, and I've seen it happen. So when you do get something that's truly ambiguous or overly broad, it's not rude to deny. It's what the statute requires you to do, and then explain to them and get into that negotiating mode. That's for public records. In the open meetings area, and when you meet and do your official business, you're having a meeting, and it must be an open meeting. Problems typically arise when a majority of the board or whatever the organization is discusses and deliberates public business outside of the meeting. If they get together for a dinner or a retreat and don't make it a public meeting, that can be a violation. And sometimes it's not noticed. A lot of this happens every day, I'm sad to say. But when it does, it's like the person who gets caught out with that full chamber in Russian roulette. So you want to not be the organization that's putting itself at risk that way. Another one is moving to go into executive session without doing it properly. And one of the most common is to say, I move to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters. Again, happens every day. I could point you to a website right now of a school board that does that every single time. Russian roulette. And we'll talk about a case really briefly in a second where that came back to haunt.
And before you leave that slide, let me just tell the group about those overly broad requests. We had some regents who were just sure that we could say no to a request in Montana that came in, and there was a lawsuit, and a key factor having to do with someone's release had to do with academic progress rate, APR, for some student athletes. And so all of us on the board and the board staff had all of our computers, both home and personal, and any email we had ever used, home or personal, forensically examined, and every email that we had written over a 3-year period in the month of April, APR, were among those that came up. So yes, we ended up having to negotiate a little bit to narrow it down, but basically the attorneys for the plaintiff wanted everything. It took a lot of negotiation.
But it's worth doing, and it helps keep you out of trouble. So how bad could it be? I mentioned there was a recent case. This is from this year. And if you look up Maddox v. Board of Directors, it shows you that this group entered executive session moving for personnel matters, which is not a statutorily permitted reason. You have to name the specific personnel matter you're going in for. They exited executive session and took off without waiting for the public to come back in and adjourn the meeting. And that seems kind of technical, and maybe it is, but it was one of many things that they were doing wrong. And finally, based on some of the improper discussions they were having outside of meetings and in improper executive sessions, they fired their executive director. That was what a lot of this revolved around. Well, one of the penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act is that it invalidates anything that was done improperly. So that fired executive director was unfired by the court. The board had to pay $3,500 in civil damages, and that was calculated by $500 per violation by the 7 violations that the court actually refined this into. There were more than that. Had to pay attorney's fees. There was over $100,000 in attorney's fees. That was reduced from a higher amount. And because the executive director was unfired, 5 months of back pay and benefits to the executive director, and to add insult to injury, court costs. So it can get very bad, and in a way that I believe this board really didn't understand as it went along that it was doing that wrong. One thing the court noted in its opinion was that the board at the beginning of its session had been given a copy of this book. They mentioned that in a footnote, and I think they mentioned it in order to drive home the fact that the board could have used this, could have stayed out of trouble by understanding the law. This is just, and if you have any questions about this, I'm going to get out of the way so that everybody can speak, and then we'll take anything that piques your interest. But this is a brand new law that most of you have law enforcement agencies associated with your colleges or universities, and it now requires, doesn't just permit you to withhold, but requires you withhold name or information disclosing the name of a allegedly delinquent child or arrestee who is also an abused child. So this won't necessarily be something the arresting officer knows. You have to go search and find out if a person, this is in connection with human trafficking. You're supposed to find out whether that person is an abused child under various linked statutes that are very complex, and not allow that name to be in a routine report, which are otherwise normally public, incident reports, police blotters, and so forth. So this last slide is, again, some information, the links that you can go to for the Yellow Book, training aids, a record of our training sessions around the state, and I will step aside now and we'll move on.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and we'll move along. Sally, before we go to Dave, who's next, did you want to make any, I have felt quite free to jump in. Did you want to make a reflection at this point?
Well, if Dave didn't scare you, he sure scared me.
Jeff?
I mean, if Jeff didn't scare you, he sure scared me about the tremendous responsibility of a fiduciary. It ranges virtually from every aspect of the institution, how it works, how well you evaluate, how well you hire and evaluate your CEO, how important it is for you to appreciate the support that that CEO receives when he or she is exercising his responsibility. It's broader than all of the finances. It's virtually the responsibility of each and every board member to understand his or her fiduciary responsibility, because it involves virtually every aspect of your work at the board. So Dr. Stern's panel here is critical to your appreciation of the vast responsibilities that you do have to your institution, to the state as a whole, and to ensure that you personally will stay in good stead as a board member and a leader.
Thank you, Sally, and if I may call you Sally, you certainly can call me Sheila while
Yes,
we're up
ma'am.
here. And I will turn to Dave now, and Dave has had long experience, and from the lens of a state auditor, certainly sees fiduciary responsibilities of board members, particularly public board members, since he's a state auditor. And he must see that all the time. He must have staff members coming to him all the time of incidents where boards are performing very, very well with regard to their fiduciary duties, and others that are stumbling. So I've given him complete free rein for the next few minutes to give us his perspective from his years of experience that might speak to one or more of us, ideally the whole room. So here you go, Dave.
Thank you. And I'll say those three words that no one ever believes coming from a preacher or a lawyer. I'll be brief. Why do we have boards at all? Boards of trustees, boards of directors in a private corporation, a school board, or a city council? The answer to that is that we are distrustful of power in individual hands as Americans. Our entire government is set up along the idea of trying to prevent the worst abuses of power. So the challenge to anyone operating in a public board is to actually execute those duties. And frequently when we find things other than accounting errors or rule errors, and that's always going to happen, and I'm not interested in playing gotcha on stuff like that, but when something really bad happens, like as not, there is a board lurking in the background where members failed to execute their duties. Now, to whom are those duties owed? The duty is owed to the institution, whether it's a corporation or university or a city, and behind that artificial organization, it's owed to the people that funded or organized the institution. Who is it not owed to? The executive, the administration. I'm going to offer you a couple of common mistakes that are made by members of the board that we see regularly in our work. And actually, I had seen prior to my time as auditor, when I was a county prosecutor, the county prosecutor is also the legal advisor to all county boards, commissions, and officers, as well as the boards of township trustees and similar organizations. So I've seen this both from looking backwards as the auditor and looking forward in advising my clients. The number one mistake people make without fail is they allow their relationship with the executive to become too friendly. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to be hard with each other or harsh, but there needs to be maintain a professional distance. If you're a physician, you don't treat your own family members because you lack the professional distance to exercise your judgment appropriately. A lawyer, it is said, who represents herself as a fool for a client. And that's because there's a lack of distance there. If you are best friends with the CEO or the CFO or the controller of the organization you represent, the odds are that you are not going to execute your duties with the distance and professional judgment that you ought to. It's not evil. Nobody's intending to let anybody get away with anything. It's a way of looking at things. You believe the best about something. And let's face it, most of the folks that, whether you're talking about running a local school or the president of a major university or anything in between, these tend to be charismatic people. They tend to be people we like being around. They have great stories. They're energetic and interesting and intriguing. They're curious about the world around them. And it's very easy to allow a cordial professional relationship to simply become too close for you to actually do your job. The second area that I see that's a sure way to crash land is to forget to ask the questions that you ask on the basis or from the perspective of the people that whose interests you represent. It's not enough to simply be looking at it in terms of, is this a well-run organization? Is this a prudent organization? The question is it in the best interests of the people of this organization, the purposes to which it was formed to serve? And the third and final one that I would suggest is taking a pro forma approach to preparing for board meetings. If the executive staff is not providing you well in advance, a week, 10 days in advance, a packet of materials for your board meeting for you to review, including financials, you should object to that. If you're getting them the day before, that's not proper. You can't be expected to adequately review these materials and prepare for the meeting on a space of 24 hours notice. Conversely, there develops sometimes a level of trust. I can look around this room and I can think of the CFOs and the presidents that are represented by some of the folks that are here who run the institutions. You know what? They're world-class people. They're folks that you trust, that anybody would trust, because they're good at what they do. They know what they're doing. And so the danger becomes that obvious competence tends to lull us to sleep in our roles as a board member. It's important to not assume anything bad, that's not what I mean, but to retain a degree of skepticism so that you prepare, that you are keeping the proper interests in mind, and that you maintain your relationships with the executive staff that you oversee at an appropriate distance. If you do those three things and consult regularly with counsel, you'll find that you're executing your duties well and serving your institutions well.
Thanks. Let's see if we can pass this back and forth. Dave, I want to follow up. You said the last one of the sort of the big three, really prepare for meetings. You know, don't just pro forma. And we all know that, even though all of us have had a meeting where we felt fortunate we just barely got there. But for the most part, the one right before that was not to be maybe too close, have some distance from the executive. What was the first one?
Actually, that was the first one.
That was first?
The second one was the second one was to remind yourself of the interests that you serve, and to ask the questions and review the things, not from the perspective of would I do this, but rather is this in the best interest of the organization?
I had a thought while you were saying that. I was visiting with a new board that is forming for ecology on the West Coast, for a college on the West Coast last week. And several of them are voting ex officio members, representatives of faculty or staff or students. And we had quite a talk about who's there, you know, with whom do they have this fiduciary responsibility? Because I think a lot of them came to that table thinking, I'm here for the faculty. I represent the students. I am here for the staff. And we had quite a talk about that is not the nature of fiduciary responsibility. The nature of the fiduciary trust is for the university itself. They are not elected constituents. Their job as fiduciaries is for the best interest and the duty of care. Isn't that right, Sally?
That's exactly right.
You're nodding. Did you want to add to that?
It is absolutely to the duty of care of the university that you represent. And only in extraordinary circumstances is there a possibility that you might break from that important rule of being a good fiduciary responsible person. I'll share that extraordinary that extraordinary experience that I personally had, and it was when Katrina hit New Orleans. And I had a university at the University of New Orleans right on the lake shore. I had another one where busloads of families were being poured out onto one of my campuses. I had board members that were calling for information. They needed help. I simply got a hold of a state trooper when the president called from Nichols State University and said, I need you here. Drop whatever you're doing. I can't handle this. I'm having hundreds of people. I have no place for them. I need somebody to help me to get in charge so that I don't get myself in trouble. I'm making life and death decisions. I had a state trooper that I knew personally. I pulled rank. I said, my board has just told me that I need to get to this campus. My board did not tell me that. To this day, I have confessed it many times, but my board did not tell me that. But I felt that at that one particular time, my fiduciary responsibility was to save that institution as best I understood that I might be able to contribute. The state trooper drove me down there. As it turned out, there were hundreds of people. We had them on the gym floor. We had babies. We had senior citizens. But the president at that moment in time needed some support. He needed somebody to say, you can do whatever you have to do under these circumstances. Forget every bit of rule and regulation that we've talked about. Now it's about something entirely different. But it's only in those extreme times that one should not adhere to his broad general responsibility to the institution that you are serving. It is the most important aspect of your work.
Arguably, Sally, I think many of us sitting here thinking about Katrina would say, you were doing your fiduciary responsibility, but let me follow up on that. You mentioned you were supporting a president, and so I have a question for you, Dave, and that is, one of the things that you worry about in colleges and universities is if there's too much turnover in your presidents, among your presidents. Being a president, chancellor can be a really hard, lonely job. And we at AGB often coach especially the board chair, to have a good and supportive, not unquestioning, not unskeptical, but a really good and supportive relationship with that president, with each president, or else, if not them, who? And so I want to throw that back at you a little bit. I think you answered it for me, but if you don't have sort of that support from the board chair, or how would you reflect on that for me?
Well, Sheila, of course, you're absolutely right. One of the roles that an independent board performs is to offer advice and counsel to the executive staff, right? And many of you are selected for particular acumen that you bring from business or finance or what have you. It would be absurd to think that staff is going to trust someone who has an adversarial relationship. So a good working relationship is certainly appropriate and necessary to the functioning of the board. The thing that I'm reacting to is the instances where I've seen where the board becomes really a tool of the executive rather than a partner. Some of you may have read about the data scrubbing scandal in Columbus City schools. It was partly a function of policy governance. And by the way, if anyone ever suggests to you that you should adopt policy governance whereby all you do is sit in the stratosphere and think big thoughts and say yes whenever your executive asks, I strongly urge you to run screaming in the opposite direction. If you've already adopted it, please seriously consider repealing it. You can't possibly do your job as an independent board under that circumstance. But that policy, combined with a very weak board that was too close to the superintendent, without a doubt exacerbated and prolonged a very difficult situation in the Columbus City schools as one possible example.
Yes, and I picked up a Columbus paper yesterday as I flew in and read all about that and thought, this is exactly the kind of thing you had been talking about in terms of the signs of potential, at least red flags for ethical collapse, in terms of too many secrets, too many people doing what they're told without asking enough questions. An example in our industry, not so much here in Ohio perhaps, but was the big Penn State issue a few years ago, where I learned, I happen to know casually the president, who I think is still in legal troubles, but who was an award-winning, much, much admired president, Graham Spanier. Right. And yet I also knew people who served on that board who said, we happen to know that he tried a few years earlier to get the the much vaunted football coach to step down, and went to his home with a board member to say, it is time. And Joe Paterno said, no, I'm not going to. So the other thing is the fiduciary for an institution is there too much power beginning, as you described it, through the charisma or the history or the whole aura around leaders, that people are willing to step back even if they ask the questions, that can be a problem. Jeff, have you run into issues or questions where you're thinking, I've seen this happen?
Yes, I represent two public bodies, which means commissions or boards. And although I can't say that the extreme problem areas resonate with me, I see the dynamics of the relationships that build, particularly when executive directors have been in place for a long time and people start dealing with each other's birthdays and families and so forth. It becomes very difficult to maintain detachment. So I don't have any horror stories, but I can certainly affirm that it takes some effort to maintain that appropriate distance.
I think Sheila's example, though, is worthy of a little more exploration, because I knew this president also and admired him quite a lot. It surprised me that I had heard about this particular situation. It surprised me that a man of this strength would not have made a decision on his own if he felt there was something wrong and could not deal with the person that he thought was doing the wrongdoing. What kind of strength would I have to either bow out or risk my own reputation? I don't have an answer for that, and I'm not sure any one of us do unless we're in that circumstance and have tested ourselves. But there's a great chance that each one of you will be faced with some type of dilemma that will question your own integrity as to what is right and what is wrong, and what is when it's time to really do nothing. Those are not written in the textbooks, but they are real if you stay on these boards or if you're in the presidency long enough. Those moments will surface. And it's good to ask yourselves those questions ahead of time. What would I do about giving up this wonderful, powerful job? At what cost? How willing am I to sacrifice something that is wonderful for myself and my family for the sake of what I believe is my integrity? And I think that's part of our fiduciary responsibility, to begin to examine those questions as we proceed with this very, very important work that each and every one of you are doing.
I'd like to just piggyback on that for a second and remind you all of a story from Greek mythology. Ulysses, on his way home, and is the island of the Sirens, right?
Right.
And as the story goes, nobody could live and hear the siren song, that they would be attracted to the siren song and die of starvation and horrible, awful stuff on the island, perfectly happy. So he plugged up the ears of his crew so they couldn't hear it, but had himself lashed to the mast of the ship so that he could hear it, with the instructions to the crew that no matter what he commanded them, they were not to release him from his bondage. And so he supposedly sailed past the island of the Sirens and heard the siren song but didn't die. That story is useful as an allegory. If you'll recall the famous aphorism by Lord Acton, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Ulysses was not a particularly evil person, wasn't a weak person, but he was a temptable person. The purpose of the board and the purpose of your strength that you were talking about, the strength of your own integrity and the strength of your own character, is because at the end of the day, any person is capable of falling. And you're there not to oppose that person, but to help them in what they need. I would go one last little point and suggest something unusual to you when you are next doing an executive search. Ask your candidate what personal steps that they have taken to try to vouchsafe the possibility of their own corruption. Because in the right circumstances, anyone is capable of selling their integrity. And you want to have people leading your organization that have thought that through and have developed a way to think about it and to act and to structure their work environment to help inform, help protect against the siren song of power. And institutionally, everybody that's on a board is part of that insurance policy.
Holy cow. I'm glad I'm not about to be interviewed by one of you for a new presidency. I think I probably would have an answer, but that's going to give me something to think about on the way home. How would I have answered that in an interview for one of my presidencies? I'm going to take that as a springboard, and some of what you said too, Sally and Jeff, and I'm going to take the liberty, as we start this question and answer session, of throwing one out to you, and I'm going to throw it to Steve. He told me I could call him Steve. Is it from Sinclair, Steve? From Community College? And Steve is sitting there with at least two of his board members, Paula and Barney, is that right? Maybe more at your table? Now, I hope one of them remembers your birthday. I hope that they are occasionally have you to dinner. I hope that these are folks that make you feel supported as president. Steve, do you have any sense, sitting there as a president, of what we say, what we're saying, and how that, what's kind of going through your mind? The fiduciary responsibility lies collectively in that board, and they have delegated a lot of that to you. And they are, of course, putting a lot of trust in you. So what are you thinking as all of us up here are talking about the siren song and the quick decisions that have to be made when you're an executive, as Sally was?
Thank you. Again, I'm Steve Johnson, president of Sinclair College in Dayton. Well, the first thing I'll say is
Steve,
that...
do you mind standing? Thanks.
I am. No. The first thing I'll say is that my birthday's on February 14th, and I've never received any kind of special birthday, anything for that. So, and now my board chair knows when it was, or is now. So, I think this is really good. So it was really, really good, and so it is remarkable. Given all of life's lessons and all of the professional lessons that are available to us that we still have almost on a daily basis across our nation and across the world, examples where you'd think that we would have learned as a people from our mistakes. And it's just remarkable that it keeps being revisited time and time again, and maybe that's just the human condition. So this is a really good panel to remind us. I think the three things to stay away from: the being too close to the CEO. I think being having the
preparing for meetings.
Well, the second one is the knowing who you are representing.
Yes.
And so that we don't have interest groups or one interest group or single interest groups getting multiple bites at the apple. Is important, and then the proper preparation for the meetings. Those are really, really good reminders. And you would think, well, that's really common sense, but it is not common sense. There's no such thing as common sense in this. So those are really, really good reminders. I think the thing that also is going through my mind on this is that we have an opportunity here to take these kind of ideas, move them forward, work with our trustees, work with our CEOs, and as a president, I'm sitting here thinking, this doesn't just apply to the board.
That's right.
And to the CEO relationship. There are a lot of other important stakeholder relationships in the complex organizations that we're serving. You flirted with that a little bit when you mentioned a football coach, but there are other special and important interest stakeholder groups within the university, as well as in the community and within the state. And so balancing all of that, actually using a lot of these ideas or deriving principles from those three areas for the other relationships is what's going through my mind also. So it's not just board chair and CEO, but it's the CEO and relationships with a lot of other groups. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. Paul?
And I will also note that, as you can tell, I had absolutely no opportunity to prepare for that question. I didn't know it was coming, so.
Oh, no, he didn't. And nor does this next person. Everyone's thinking, oh my gosh, did I meet her during when she was circulating ahead of time? But a person, and she can feel free to say no, that I spoke with a little bit was Peg, or Margaret, who is a new board member from the University of Cincinnati. But what I found interesting when I visited with you, Peg, was that you have also served on, for example, a ballet board and other not-for-profit. So is it Brent? Are you our microphone guy? She's back there in the red, and I have a question for her, and then I will stop asking questions and let you start asking. But Margaret or Peg, have you heard some themes here that, if you'd stand, please, have you heard some themes that strike you as fiduciary principles for these boards, including this new one you're just starting, University of Cincinnati, and also these other ones that you have served over the years that somehow resonate with you, or that you would add to what we have to say?
Well, I think they all resonate, and I have followed those principles. And in one board that I'm on, or actually two, I just stepped off as chair on one, we went through a very difficult year, and a few board members told me if I hadn't been at the helm and directed it in the right way, the organization would not exist today. And a few years ago, I did the same thing for the Cincinnati Preservation Association. And I'm in a difficult situation with my present board, my new appointment, and I intend to follow the same path and direct it in the right way.
Great. Hear, hear.
For you.
So,
and I will just tell you, when I was a brand new teacher in my 20s, non-tenured, I sued my school board for freedom of speech in federal court because the school board was making board policies in violation of sunshine laws. I won in court and they didn't fire me.
well,
For you.
Peg, I didn't expect such a terrific answer. And at some point, if I ever write, a little set of essays or case studies, believe me, I'm going to get your card or your name and number to call you up, because I'm interested about the Preservation Society and these other experiences you've had. Okay, your turn. So comments or questions, and from others who want to kind of give us a sense of an experience that would be helpful to the group. I do have one over here. Good.
I just want to clarify, or I gotta stand this way. I just want to clarify with Dave Yost. Did I hear you correctly that policy governance type of running a board is something to run away from?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, policy governance is a fairly rigorous system. Actually, it was developed in academia, so there may even be somebody here that was involved with that. But the idea is that the goals are set by the board at a very high level, and that there's no real interface between the board's oversight of the executive, that the executive is free to pursue those goals in the way that the executive sees fit. And I can see that you're thinking that that's not the way it's supposed to work. I have not seen in Ohio an instance where board governance properly carried out the policy governance properly carried out the role of the board in Ohio. I have seen several instances where it led to a crash landing. So, yeah, I do not support that movement or that school of thought at all. And where there are successes, I would suggest that it probably is a function of succeeding in spite of that rather than because of it.
That is a good question, and tomorrow in one of our sessions on the habits of high-performing boards, Carol Cartwright and I will be talking about that a little bit. What is your first name? Rich. It's a really good point, Rich, and Dave as well. But one of the things that Sally and I run across as we consult with boards around the country is how often board members are very frustrated by a board member. That's right. One over here, and who believes that really maybe they ought to be the executive and that they need to micromanage. And so somewhere in that spectrum, because of board members, God forbid individually, but even collectively feeling that they should, really, why have a president? We'll just manage. And the other extreme that the auditor just described of being only at 50,000 feet and never, at 5,000 or 15 or, at different levels. As a group, as a board, you have only collective power. That's right. But you have individual questioning ability. And what I often advise boards that are monitoring their own performance is find the ways to communicate those questions through, respectful channels, not running to a faculty member you happen to know in the econ department to say, why do you suppose they're doing that? See what I mean? I mean, you can get into micromanagement too, at the other extreme from purely policy. So, but really good point, and we'll try to elaborate on it tomorrow. Next.
Yes, particularly for the auditor, have you given more thought to the kind of training that board members actually need? There are a lot of board members who are coming to their positions, whether they're in public education at the elementary, secondary level or at the higher ed level, and even in some city councils where I see members who don't understand democracy fundamentally. They don't understand checks and balances. They don't understand their role really within the institution. So beyond the excellent kernels that have been given, have you thought about some training, actual training that those individuals need? I don't want to go further, but they come to the position because they want to do the right thing. And then after they get there, what's been said so well, the charismatic leader, the person that they admire, sort of has them spellbound almost, and then they end up responding to that person as opposed to keeping the real subject ahead of them, and that's the students.
Well,
First of all, Dave, and then Sally.
You obviously are in a position where you've had a ringside seat to see some of those things, and your points are very well taken. Our office does provide some training. We also have a webinar that's about an hour that Justice Robert Cupp and I put together. It's on our website. That being said, we coordinate regularly with OASBO and several other of the professional organizations associated, especially with schools, the Ohio Municipal League, to provide training where it's welcome. With limited resources, I have to confess that I don't knock down the door and saying, pick me, pick me. But you're very well, your points are very well taken, and it's something that we probably need to take an even closer review of what we're offering to equip these local citizens who are typically underpaid or not paid and not appreciated. Board work is some of the most thankless work that anybody ever has to do. And I'm want to say thank you for all of you that engage and invest your time and talent to make our state better.
Sally, comment?
I would simply echo what he just said. Your work from many aspects is somewhat thankless considering the amount of work that you're doing or you will have to do and the volume of issues that you will be dealing with. Some of us do individual coaching to strengthen up those aspects that are necessary. I'm working with a wonderful leader whose board chair, quite frankly, would like to just simply have her job. How do you deal with that? How does one go about that kind of work when the person that you rely on the most to be your partner is also trying to undermine? And does she leave? Does she find another job elsewhere? Does she stay there and work it through? Does she take that risk and allow this to happen? Those are value calls that only the individual can make, but sometimes with a proper independent voice, it can be helpful. We all have moments in our careers where we have made decisions that sometimes we reflect on and perhaps we would have taken a different course, but it's particularly helpful when there's someone you can pick up the phone and call, or if there's a service that's available to address issues that have not yet occurred so that you can be even better prepared. But the fact that all of you are here today, the fact that your governor and Charles C. and others have worked so very hard to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask questions, to pull some of us aside and ask even deeper questions that you don't want to ask in public, that's a message to you that your leaders of this state care enough about you and your work and the students and the faculty to ensure that you have the opportunity. Your very presence here is very indicative of the fact that you care enough to learn more, to understand the questions that should be asked, and to probably even understand your role better in these delicate circumstances.
Jeff, a minute.
I would just add, I know that there is training required through the Ethics Commission of various public officials, and I suspect that it covers your offices. And if it doesn't, there's generally training available, and good resources for that are the state offices that specialize in it. So whether it's the auditor's office or mine or the Ethics Commission, very often training is available usually for free, particularly in Central Ohio, above and beyond what's required. And your legal counsel, who, again, you should rely on, you pay them, you might as well use them, should be able to direct you to training as well. And they'll have a special interest in knowing that you've not just received the training, but asked for it. You know, if they find themselves defending you or helping defend you in anything, the fact that you took a serious interest in it, that you looked at it as not just an obligation, but almost a patriotic duty, is going to benefit everybody involved.
Let me have one other thing on this. As a practical matter, we have a trustee of a major university who's a lawyer who did something that was against the law. Not criminally against the law, just non-compliant with the governing statute. And that individual had gone to the university council and sought direction and was given bad advice, actually. But because of that, our office, in examining this situation, changed its view. Not that your lawyer's permission is a carte blanche to do whatever you want, but when it comes down to some of these difficult questions, Our office, when we're doing our compliance reviews, cares very much whether you are acting on advice of counsel, and we look at it very differently if you were. So to put in a plug for my friend in the Attorney General's office, they would love, or your local, your in-house counsel, it's always better to ask the lawyer beforehand rather than to ask the lawyer, I got this letter and it sounds really bad. Am I in trouble? Thank you for that comment, Jeff.
We are just about at the end of our time, and so I'm going to call on one of these regents right in front of me. And Thomas, you're the closest. If you go by Tom or Thomas? Thomas? Tom is fine? Okay. And here comes a microphone your way, and you can help wrap this up for us a little bit, because Sally and I are going to get a chance in the next couple days to put this a little bit, all of this in a little bit more higher ed context. But you look like, you're here, the Board of Regents, you met this morning, you yourself have a fiduciary duty. What are your thoughts as we've all been reflecting on this? Because a couple times you've smiled or nodded or raised a questioning eyebrow. So if you don't mind, we'd like to have you help wrap this up for us.
Well, one of the thoughts that kept coming to my mind is the ethics training that I have taken a couple times. And the fact that it was offered, and I thought, well, geez, I'm a very ethical person. Do I really need this training? But as I went through that training and sitting here today and reflecting on that training that I took, it seems a lot more meaningful now for open dialogue and discussion. And it's things that we might automatically assume that we do, but it should be given more thought as we do it, in my opinion. I saw that as an opportunity for me to reflect as I go forward on how I think about the decisions I make and the decisions I don't make. And I think the other point that I took away is we talk about boards and their responsibilities. They are one vote. The board has to come together, and we can offer questions as was suggested, and we can have that dialogue, but it's still the board's decision, and we are part of that board. So those are the things that I took away from the discussion today, and I thought it was very insightful. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And we will be circulating. We're going into a break right now, and the next panel will be setting up. But I would like to take this opportunity to have you help me thank our panelists, Sally, Jeff, Dave. What a great group. And I think you're very fortunate here in the state of Ohio in a number of ways and with a number of the people here who are resources for you. So thank you very much. We'll see you during the break.
I think we're ready for the next session, whenever you are. Some of you actually requested this session because you wanted to hear from those who had experience in what you're now, many of you are beginning to do or have only just begun to do. And so Charles C. and his staff gave us some wonderful recommendations, and I think you're going to find what they have to say very interesting and helpful. These are experienced board members. I'm going to call their names, and then I'm just going to turn it over to them because they all have a lot to say. Mark Walton, very abbreviated introductions, they'll speak for themselves, has spent 20 years as a trustee at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College. He is a successful director of economic development for Fifth Third Bank in Cincinnati. Bob Schottenstein, did I pronounce it correctly?
Schottenstein.
Is an extraordinarily successful businessman who has been chair of Ohio State, has many years' experience on the board, and has a 65,000 home business I'll let you ask him more questions about that.
90,000.
No. Oh. My notes are just old. Bob Rawson has experience on a couple of boards, one of which is Princeton University Board for the past 20 years. The other is he has been chair of Ohio State Board as well.
Cleveland State.
That's Bob Rawson. Sorry. Bob Rawson has been chair of Cleveland State. Now I've got 2 marks against me. Dee Talmadge is here. I just wanted to make sure this time I'm correct. Chair of Owens Community College, a very engaged civic leader. Sandy Anderson, trustee and chair of Ohio University, Ohio State Office of Legal Affairs, has been some of her work. And what they have been asked to share with you is what they wished they had been told when they were sitting in your shoes, when they were just beginning their work as a board member, understanding the university or the universities with which they are representing. And they have a lot to say. I was able to be fortunate enough to spend about an hour and a half with them, maybe not quite that long, a short while ago, and there is a wealth of information in every one of these individuals. I'm going to give them the opportunity to talk among themselves. This is intended to be a discussion. They know the time is limited, but they also know that anything they have to say might be particularly helpful to you. I will start over here with Sandy. I don't know if you can all see her, but she does speak loud enough and has enough to say that I'm sure you'll be listening. Sandy, talk to us about your board experience and what you wished you had known or had been informed about as you began your tenure.
Sure, I'll raise a couple of things. I've been on the Ohio University Board of Trustees. I think I'm in my 8th year now. Last year I served as chair of the board, so I got to be chair a little earlier than otherwise. And I have a couple more years left on the board. I'm chairing the Resources Committee now on the Ohio University Board of Trustees. And I thought back to when I first got appointed, I was so excited. I am an OU alum. I'm a passionate Ohio University grad. If you see my car out in the parking lot, the license plate says "Go to OU." So I was so excited about being on the Board of Trustees appointed by Governor Strickland, and I made a mistake right away. And that was when before I even went to my first board meeting, I got a call from a reporter asking me questions, and I answered them. And expressed some opinions about faculty salaries and such when I didn't know beans about the university yet. And so I learned a lesson right away about who really speaks on behalf of the board. And it ain't a new board member. I'm sorry to tell you, new board members, it's the chair of the board. So I learned a painful lesson right away that I am not the spokesperson for the board as a new board member. And one question I have for you in the audience, how many of you out there are trustees? Okay, and how many of you who are trustees are in your first, second, or third year? Great. Okay, we got some newbies. That's wonderful. One of the things I'll tell you newbies is to appreciate the board materials. Again, as a newcomer to the board, I was still at my law firm then, the Voorhees Law Firm, when I first was appointed to the Board of Trustees. A couple of weeks before my first board meeting, I got this lovely, huge board book. And I sort of put it aside and attended to my day job and maybe picked it up the night before I went to the board meeting. It's like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? I don't understand it. I didn't give it enough reading time. So that was a mistake. One thing I learned after leaving the Voorhees firm and getting the position, the wonderful opportunity to be Deputy General Counsel at The Ohio State University, is I now saw it from the other side. And all the work and the hundreds of hours and the blood, sweat, and tears that the staff and administration on the university level put into that board book. and how much tension there is and pressure to get that done and get it done right for the Board of Trustees. So I had the opportunity to appreciate more the work that went into that board book 2 weeks before we got it. So I urge you as new board members not to make my mistake, but actually appreciate that board book and read it, among other things that you can read. I've got some more advice, but I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Great. Diana, you want to start?
I'm Dee Talmadge. I've been on the Owens Community College Board for 8 years, and I was just recently reappointed to another term, which I'm delighted. I served as chair for 3 years, and now I am serving as vice chair. One of the things that I wish I would have known when I became a new trustee was the amount of time it would take. I had been on the school board for 8 years and had read reams of paper and everything. I thought, well, I'm all prepared. What I learned was it wasn't just the meetings. I tried to attend committee meetings to learn what was going on. I visited the campus and went around to meet people, so that took time. And there was just a lot of reading. I used to lay it down by my chair and I'd think, oh, I'll read it tomorrow night. Well, I didn't get done tomorrow night. It took me a couple of days, 2 or 3 days to get through, so it took a lot. I learned to be a good listener. There was so much material and I just didn't know anything about. And sometimes, though, I needed to learn to ask the appropriate questions, because if I was afraid to ask the question because somebody might think I didn't know what I was talking about, next thing you know, they would ask the question and I think, well, why not? So I think that's an important thing also. I think, too, I had to learn that there was going to be a learning curve. It wasn't going to be 2 weeks, a month or so. It was going to be a long time, maybe a year or two. So that was something. And the other thing was that I learned that I really had no individual rights. I had my opinions, but as a group we made a decision and we were all equal. And I have some other things I'll talk about later.
Excellent. Mark?
Well, like Dee, I was reappointed by Governor Kasich just a few days ago, 4 days before my 90-day extension passed my expiry date. So I barely made it in, and I'm starting my 20th year as a trustee at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College, and was the first alum of the college appointed to the board, and am still the only alum of the college on the board. I was sitting with Margaret Valentine, who's a brand spanking new board member at the University of Cincinnati. That's one of my other colleges, so do good work and pay attention, Margaret. You're going to need this advice up here. The things that I wish I knew when I started some 20 years ago as a brand new trustee, one was just how essential fundraising is to the core of what we do. Not fundraising for a specific building or some dream program or something that's on a wish list, but really the absolute core of what we do, and how important it is that the trustees engage in that. All of our institutions up here have foundations that support our institutions, but the trustees are still intricately involved in that, and so are the presidents. And not all presidents like to fundraise. In fact, it's rare that you get one that absolutely loves it. Many are good at it, but most don't like doing it. Most don't like asking for money, and I believe that it is a role and responsibility of the trustees to assist in that, to help bring warm leads and hot leads to the institution's CEO, and then let them push it across the finish line with your help. The second thing that I wish I knew way back when was how important it was and is to engage with faculty. It is, I believe, essential to not just understand from the trustees' point of view the fiduciary responsibility that you have, but also to understand the institution. And it's tough to do that if you don't engage with faculty. You know, in my private life, I'm a banker, and I've been a banker for over 30 years, and the faculty deliver your product to the students. I mean, you know, and so you've got to have, I believe, a pretty good relationship, or at least an understanding as to where faculty's coming from and what they're trying to accomplish. And then finally, and this goes back to my first point, and that is to really begin to understand from day one the various funding models that are out there in your institutions. And those are very difficult. If you just let it come to you, it could be 3-4 years before you really understand the effects that the various funding models have on your institutions. And I've got other things, but I'll stop.
Yes, Bob Rawson, Cleveland State Viking. And I first will forewarn you that my adult sons have been telling me for years and still are telling me that I have an extraordinary talent for stating the obvious. So what follows may well fall into that category. But forgive me, they are things that I wish I would have known when I started out being a trustee. The first point I would make is a broad one, and that is that governance is an art, it's not a science, and it's hard work. And as my colleagues have already made the point, there is a lot of education to be done. We are all experts in education because we have been educated, right? If you've been to a college or a university, you understand the whole deal. Well, I would suggest to you that there is a lot to be learned, and I would suggest the best way to do that, this picks up on something that Mark was saying, is by walking around, by actually getting onto the campus and actually getting to know your institution, so that you can contribute in areas where the university really needs your help. Second point I would make, that I wish I had understood more completely than I did at the time, is that most of us come to this kind of service having had experience with corporate boards or with boards of philanthropic organizations. Those are organizations generally which are governed vertically. That isn't what we do in universities. Universities are horizontal, and I'm making a broad point just to make the point. The term that's used is that we have shared governance. But I would ask you to think hard about that term. That's a term that trips lightly off the lips. But the fact of the matter is that shared governance is understood differently, I would bet, at each and every one of our institutions. And some of the persons who are asked to create a circumstance of shared governance will bring different viewpoints to it than others may. Faculty will have one view, others will have another. The important thing is for you to figure that out and to adjust to the fact that you need to be able to deal with both faculty and administration, and of course, importantly, your president. Final point I would make before turning the microphone over is that there is a difference between a public and a private institution. If you've been on other boards, they may be private. You can conduct your business in different ways than you can do at a public institution. A lot of the issues that are involved from a legal standpoint were touched on by the last panel, so I won't repeat them. But the point is that you need to make your peace with what rules govern, find ways for your institution to function in a way within the rules that allow you to be faithful to your public fiduciary duties. And by fiduciary duties, I'm talking not just about the financial duties, but about the duties broadly to the various constituency groups, including the broader community, and if you want to think of it this way, to the taxpayers of Ohio. In order to conduct it publicly, you need to carefully approach it. There are no easy answers, and every different circumstance will call for a different kind of a response. Sally, let me end there and come back later.
Terrific. Bob?
Thank you, Sally, and thank you for being here. And I also want to thank the Chancellor and Charles C. for asking me to be on this panel. I was appointed to the OSU board by then Governor Bob Taft in 2005, and I expired a few months ago. It sort of felt like that, too, if you want to know the truth. My 9-year term came to an end in May of this year, and serving on the Ohio State University board for 9 years was, and I've said this to many people, the great, for me anyway, the greatest honor I could have possibly had. I loved it, and I learned so much. It was a very interesting time because when I joined the board, by state law, there were 9 trustees, and the most senior trustee automatically became chair and then cycled off, and then a newbie like me arrived in 2005. And it was within a year and a half after I joined the board that the General Assembly and the governor enacted new law to expand the Ohio State Board from 9 members to 15, which I think in hindsight was a very, very wise move. What that did from a governance standpoint, and I really appreciate the comments that have been made, particularly that governance is an art, not a science, and who's doing the governing often determines the quality of the artwork. It required a complete re-examination and reinvention of the way in which the OSU board operated, beginning with the fact that there was no longer an automatic chair, and how our committee structured, and frequency of meetings, and what is the role of the board. Let me say this, that we all want our universities to get better, and we want them to be great. And it was actually Gordon Gee that made this comment, and I think it's a very powerful one. And he said that you cannot have a great university without a great president. And then he went on to say, and you can't have a great president and a great university without a great board. Those words are easy to say, very difficult to do. It's very much a collaborative relationship between president on the one hand, board on the other. The point is, the board matters, just like the president matters. Who's on the board matters. How the board conducts itself matters. The rules of engagements, a number of the things that my fellow panelists have talked about, they all matter. And it really starts at the beginning. And as I looked at the question that Sally, you posed, which I think is a great question, is what do I wish I had known? Honestly, when I joined OSU's board, I wish they'd had an orientation. They sort of did. I went up to campus for about 2 hours or 3 hours and then went home. But didn't, and so one thought I had, and I don't know how, because whether a university is a small community college or 62,000 students and 40-some thousand employees at Ohio State, orientations, I think there's a certain consistency that can be had, and I think that possibly, and maybe this is something we can chat about maybe later or afterwards, is creating some sort of a statewide template to assure that the orientations take place, that issues like compliance, ethics laws, the role of the board. What is the board's role? Do board members understand what the role of the board is vis-a-vis administration? It's different at that role may be different at Ohio State than at some other institutions, but beginning to understand that. What are the major challenges facing the university today? I had no idea what they were when I joined OSU's board. If I had, I think I still would have joined. But by the way, my other co-board members didn't really know what they were either. And some had been there a while because it wasn't clearly articulated or clearly understood. What are the goals of the president? Do they match up with the goals of the board? Does the board understand the financial structure of the university? One of the co-panelists, I mean, these are just some of the items that I think could be part of a robust 1 or 2 day orientation. By the way, it's a never-ending process learning these things, and they're constantly changing, but at least to create some kind of a level set day one. The educational goals at a school like Ohio State, in-state versus out-of-state, international enrollment versus the sons and daughters of Ohio. How many? Tuition balancing, graduate school, in-state, out-of-state. What are the factors and key drivers that influence those kind of things? Understanding the process for evaluating the president. Who does it? What does the president have board goals in addition to the president's goals? So, I mean, there's a whole lot. Each one of these is a conversation. But I just want to go back to one thing, and it's the comment that Bob made about it's an art and not a science. I'll take a really simple little example. If we wanted to double football ticket prices, and I'm going to use football because maybe it's an easy one to use. If you wanted to double the price of football tickets at Ohio State, whose decision is it? Well, as a board member, I would say, got to be athletic director, right? That's what we hired the athletic director for, to run the athletic department. It's an art. It's not science. And so there's so many, you say, what is the role of the board? You can give a business school 101 definition, but you get inviting a public interest group to come speak at the campus on some topic, gay marriage, international relations with the Muslim community, things that are that the marketplace of ideas ought to welcome at our colleges and universities, but yet there may be certain board members that are made uncomfortable by some of these things. The delicate balance between when is the board advised, when is it the board's decision, when is it strictly the president of the university and the university management's decision. There's books and books and books written about this with no easy answers. And with that, I'll just sort of pause.
Thank you. I'm going to throw out a couple of questions to our panelists that we have not rehearsed. We did talk an hour or so ago about start us off with some of those most obvious. But some of the conversations that are going on in families today is about cost. And cost is not always understood. In today's climate, America must educate more of its students than ever before. It's not just those whose families come from financial backgrounds that they can afford, but for America to survive, we have to now educate students that heretofore have not either had the opportunity or had the affordability to be able to attend college. With the tight budget situation and the challenges upon our leaders now to balance those budgets, do more with less, hire still the best faculty, what are the challenges that you see, and perhaps what are some of the solutions that you could offer colleagues that are about to start asking those questions and maybe even trying to offer some answers?
Well, I'll start. Representing the community colleges, certainly we have, if not most, all of us, as a big part of our mission, access. And, there's a delicate balance there because I know at Cincinnati State, one of the issues that we deal with that has a financial cost to it, and other costs as well, is students that come to our campus and are not quite ready. And so we have to run them through other courses to get them ready. And there's a fine balance between when they feel they're actually in college or they're still taking remedial courses, trying to get ready, and they drop out, and that's a cost to us. But we work very hard to get those students ready. We're also looking for other ways to have other institutions establishing other partnerships where other organizations can get those students ready before they come to our campus. I mean, our tuition is relatively low. I mean, it's $4,000 a year for a student. But I'm also a father with that just got a daughter through the University of Cincinnati. I've got a son at the University of Toledo, and I've got a junior in high school. And I'm not sure, he hasn't decided where he's going. But it's an issue. I think that if we're not dealing with it as board members, certainly we're dealing with it in our personal lives. So I'll let some of the other members speak on that.
Sandy?
Yes, certainly as public institutions, we have a role to play for the citizens of Ohio, as Bobby says, the sons and daughters of Ohio, but then also beyond that, citizens of the United States. And I'm reminded of something that Nancy Zimpher said at an AGB conference. Nancy Zimpher is the chancellor, I believe, of SUNY, Southern State University in New York system. And in a discussion about affordability, accessibility, and about student quality, academic quality, and admission standards and things like that, she said something along the lines of, we need to quit congratulating ourselves about the students we leave out, about the people we don't let in, the people we don't educate. So certainly I think our mission, I know at Ohio University we have a very important mission. It's one of our priorities. I've got our presidential priorities document in front of me, and one of our priorities is to improve affordability and accessibility. I think everybody in the room can agree that that's a pretty important priority. And as a board member, we receive, interact with, sometimes have ideas back the other direction with our administration on how we can do that. Nice words, improve affordability and accessibility, but how do you do it? I mean, how do you do it? And it ranges everything from, for example, the scholarship program that we've set up, scholarship programs, I should say, we've set up at Ohio University. The fundraising we do, Mark, by setting up matching fund programs for scholarships, endowed scholarship programs through the foundation. The Ohio Guarantee that has just gone into effect at Ohio University, where we guarantee one rate for tuition for 4 years, with the goal of getting people through the university in 4 years so they don't incur as much debt if they take their time with 6 or 7 year plan, those kind of things.
I just want to comment on that last goal that she just mentioned is a powerful one. It's an incentive for students to make better grades because they can move on, and they can move on, excuse me, more economically. It is working in many institutions throughout the country now.
And for the new trustees to learn more or to get yourself better educated about the national issues, and it truly is national issues of how can we educate more of our citizens, how can we provide better access, as Mark talks about, how can we make it more affordable, then there's a lot of learning you can do, not just waiting passively for your administration to tell you, but everything from reading the Chronicle of Higher Education to reading the trusteeship magazines to looking at the news articles that are out there to attending an AGB conference. And I'm not paid to plug AGB, but I will tell you that I didn't go to an AGB conference until I was like in my 3rd or 4th year, and I wish I'd gone sooner, because these kind of national issues with national experts and colleagues all across the country are available to really inspire and trigger your creative juices. And you can learn more and enhance your own ability to govern your own university on these issues. It's a big topic and so important, Sally, so important.
Sally?
Yes, Bob.
If I can add, Sandy has well stated what I think the issue should be properly, how it should be properly stated. I think we collectively have a societal obligation to educate as many of our people as we can. And to state the obvious, again, I'm an expert at that, there are only 3 sources of funding for education, generally speaking. It's going to be tuition and family support, it's going to be public support, or it's going to be private philanthropy of for some kind or another. My own very simplistic view is that education, higher education, is a public good, and the public ought to be willing to pay the necessary dollars accountably in order to get our people educated. It's a challenge to get us there. But I think that we as trustees, whether we're new or more senior trustees, have an opportunity and obligation to try to impact the conversation that's being had in this country about higher education. The notion that higher education is wasting money and not educating kids is, I just think, false. And some of us have to stand up and make sure that's true. Now, I'll end on one note. Sally, this is serious enough that I've prayed over it. I have said to God, God, is our society ever going to sufficiently fund higher education? And God answered me and said, yes, but not in my lifetime.
That's good. If I could, just to add maybe a slight twist on what's been said. When I joined the OSU board, and I suspect it's this way for many of you as well, I mean, we all come from different places. I had been in business all my life. I had never taught. I was never a professor or an administrator at an institution for higher ed. So I come in with a business perspective. And, you know, simply stated, it was, you know, in our business, yes, build a quality product, but hopefully charge as much for it as possible. And try to make certain that the expense side of the house is held down. That's a bad way to look at this. And I sort of did when I went on the OSU board. And it was fellow trustee at the time, Gil Cloyd from Cincinnati, who a year or two into my term on the board, we were chatting about the land grant mission. And you don't have to be a land grant university to say this, but he very powerfully articulated these issues of affordability and access. And how unlike business where you want to get the most for a box of Tide or the most for an MI home, this is about how can we hold tuition down. And unlike in business where you want to have a maximum profit margin, we want to have a really strong student-teacher ratio. By that I mean small classes. Well, that pushes the expense and the margin in the opposite way that a business might. So it's not really a business. On the other hand, there are certain things about at least Ohio State, and I suspect every university, that viewing them from somewhat of a business perspective is what's needed to help this issue. The notion, and this is sort of a topic that became in vogue 4 or 5 years ago, was we need to act, at least at Ohio State, more entrepreneurially. What does that mean? We need to find ways to generate revenues. We need to find ways that don't impact the academy to minimize expenses. Why? So we can provide a higher quality education and give more scholarships and hold tuition down. So for example, just from a fundraising standpoint, Bob and I were talking about this in the hallway beforehand, Ohio State has more living alums, and again, I don't mean to be talking so much about Ohio State because this applies to every university in one form or another. We have more living alums than any other university in the United States. We don't have the most number of donors. We're not even in the top 10. If we didn't come in the top 10 in football, they'd fire the coach. Particularly since, well, there used to only be 10 teams. My point is, if Ohio State can, and Ohio State is about this now, but it was an issue that there was somewhat of a blind spot not that long ago. If Ohio State can increase its fundraising by 5 and 10% per year, and it certainly can, and that still wouldn't put it in the top 10. Now it's headed to become top 5. It can double and triple the amount of scholarships it gives out annually.
Very good. Anybody else want to comment on that issue?
I just wanted to piggyback on something, because a lot of what you said, what I would say, but what Mark said about community colleges, of course at Owens we're open access, and so we have a lot of remedial, English and math students. I just wanted to say one of the things we do is we have something called a math emporium where the students can work at their own rate of speed. So if they get finished the coursework halfway through the semester, they're done and can move on. So I just wanted to share that.
I'm going to open this up to the audience now. I'm going to throw out a couple of questions, one more that is perhaps an extension of the last one, and that is, we had a couple of business messages just now, particularly from both Bobs, actually. And I wonder whether or not we have to question our own business model at the university. Is there something about the way we are funding? Are there questions that we need to be asking about how well we are doing our business at the university? After all, we still have to reach the bottom line, and it has to balance. We still have to educate more students because America needs us to educate more students, and somebody has to pay the bill. So what about our business model, and how do we know whether remedial is working in the time frame that it should be? And are there new pathways for students who have come into our universities but have not had the traditional pathway of a particular curriculum in high school and the support from families from preschool all the way through high school? I wonder if there are any observations at the panel, and then I'd like to throw it out to the audience to ask questions.
I have a couple of observations. I think the role of the community colleges and the 4 years are a little different in that, and I think Jack Hershey mentioned it in his remarks, that the universities are preparing for that workforce of the future, and we're preparing for that workforce right now. We have a lot of transfer students that go on to 4 years and 4-year institutions and onward. I'm one of them. But we also are moving at the speed of business. Our real clients, if I can use those terms, since we're talking business vernacular, are students and companies that employ our students. And sometimes we hold on to programs longer than we should. Because we're good at it, we've always had them, or whatever reason we happen to use at the time. And especially at the 2-year institutions, if the programs aren't really meeting the needs of the community, of the businesses, of that client base, those organizations that are hiring our students, we need to shut those programs down. And I find that that's very difficult to do. Faculty don't want us to do it. There are some administrators that don't want us to do it, and I personally I don't quite understand it. But even as a trustee entering my 20th year, it seems to me that if we're providing something that our clients don't need, then we ought to stop providing that. And it's not that we're educating students necessarily for the nation or the world. It's really for our community, the community with which we operate.
It is. Anybody else? Bob?
Well, I can piggyback on what Mark has, I think, well said. What I would emphasize is that we all look at our budget process in a very careful way. I mean, Bobby's already alluded to the fact that costs rise in certain circumstances based on programming decisions that you make. If you want smaller classes, it's going to cost you more money, was the example that he used. But the point really is to think of the budget process as a program budgeting process. It is a way of every year having a chance to look at what your university is offering and deciding whether the judgments you're making make business sense in the context of what programs you're trying to offer, the products that you're trying to produce, the students you're trying to educate. And if in our budgeting process and I think we're all guilty of this from time to time, we take last year's budget and extrapolate and adopt it as this year's budget. Perhaps we're not serving our constituents as well as we possibly could. That wouldn't require a fundamental change in business modeling. It's just a different way of looking at how we budget things. Costs and paying attention to costs is something that we have to do. The current climate requires it of us, if nothing else. But we ought to be looking at costs in the service of the other aspects of the university that we consider to be so important. And it's up to the board, I think, to focus on what those programming priorities ought to be.
Yes, for new board members, I hope you focus for your own institution on the big questions of what are our resources, what are the sources of our resources, and then what are we using them on? And those are like the big picture items as you're looking through whatever budget documents, whatever financial documents you have at your own institution. And you've heard here today, like the big buckets of resources for any institution are the state share of instruction, SIS. I used to not know what SIS meant, but it's state, or SSI, I should say, state share of instructions, SSI. That's whatever the state gives us through the formula that's, I guess, undergoing talk right now of revisions. There's the foundation support or whatever private giving your institution has. There's tuition, which is big. Anywhere you go, the tuition is something that the university has within limits some control over, based depending on what kind of cap the state puts on us for tuition increases. And then there's the commercialization or the entrepreneurial side that Bobby Schottenstein talked about. Maybe at your institution there might be research dollars available through whatever items you have at your college or university that might be able to be commercialized for revenue, for income. But then once you have that bucket, then what are you using it for? So as new board members, you need to study what are the uses of our resources. How much is going into faculty? How much is going into capital projects? You'll learn a lot about deferred maintenance. That's another couple of words that I didn't know much about as a new board member, but deferred maintenance is, we put off that roof, we put off the repairing the cracks in the concrete to avoid costs. Well, deferred maintenance is something at your institution that requires some attention, I dare say. So what are the uses of the resources that come into your institution? Those are the kind of questions you need to ask yourself and ask your administration at your board meetings.
Excellent answers. Now I'd like to bring it to you and see if you have some questions. Cost, anything that might trigger your imagination. Do you happen to know what it costs to produce a teacher at OU? At any one of the institutions that you might be representing? Do you know how much money you're spending on remedial education now? And is remedial education working? And if so, how well? Would you like to ask these experts who have delved into so many issues like that, the big important questions about what you will be dealing with on a monthly, at least, basis? Anybody? Well, let me ask the panel some more questions, and I might ask you to ask each other some. Bob?
Well, I wanted to go back to the previous presentation that started out with ethics and training on ethics, and this is very tactical, and I apologize.
It is very appropriate for
right.
this
I
session.
don't want to get to, but no one in here can become an expert on Ohio ethics laws, and no one in here can become an expert on how to respond to public records.
Right.
But as a trustee, whether it happens at the full board level or within perhaps an audit and compliance committee of the board, it seems to me that every institution in the state, if I can be so presumptuous to say this, I don't think every institution does this, but I think every institution should. There ought to be a regular protocol where the general counsel of the university or someone like that, probably the general counsel, walks into the committee meeting and presents a piece of paper that says, these are the public records requests that we've received, and this is what we're doing about it. There was more than one time, first of all, and this really goes back to a larger issue, and this is what kept popping in my mind during the hour that preceded us, was that the most precious asset any of our institutions have is our reputation. And audit and compliance sounds like a really boring, perfunctory committee to be on. But in many ways, it's the guardian of the reputation of the institution. And if things happen that result in non-compliance, whether they be in athletics or in medicine or in research or in elevators that aren't inspected properly, and God forbid something tragic happens, it goes right to, or safety on campus, it goes right to the reputation of the institution. So I think that whether it's the largest university in Ohio or the smallest, whether it's a community college or not, this process of regular reporting, these are the requests we've got, this is how quickly we followed up, this is why we haven't followed up, and here's why. And I think all these, and of course then there's a whole rigmarole about compliance and how do we assure compliance. And I think that it's not until you get in trouble and you have a crisis, and every institution is going to have one, and we had our fair share while I was on the board, and maybe that's why I'm particularly, my antenna is peaked on this. And Sandy and I worked on a number of those together, for better, for worse, I hope for better. But I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for sharing that. Sandy, did you want to add to that since you were?
Yeah, again, I'm trying to think of myself as a brand new trustee. What would help me for you all to hear as new trustees? So let me say something about ethics and conflict of interest, and let me say something about public records, because we're all now we're under the public records law, sunshine law, as you just heard. On the ethics, you all ought to have access to legal counsel, either through the Ohio Attorney General's office, because as you just heard from the last panel, the Ohio Attorney General represents all of us, or you may have in-house counsel, as we do at Ohio University, as they have at Ohio State University. And so as board members, if you have concerns or questions, or your hackles go up about something, then through the board president, or through the board chair, through the university president, and then with university counsel, you can get those questions addressed. You shouldn't hide them under a bushel. If you have some issue that needs to be addressed, there's someone who can answer it. So it's best to raise it rather than not. If you have any question at all about something that seems fishy, or you just have a question that is in the field of ethics or under conflicts of interest. I mean, do you know whether you're allowed to vote on something because you're related to somebody who has this contract proposal with the university? Or how do you go about finding out who might be entering a contract with the university? Those kind of questions, go get an answer. Don't try to just feel it or based on common sense, but go to your board chair, go to university or college president, and then get help through the legal counsel that we all have access to. So that's on the ethics. On public records, just a very basic example. When you write an email in your capacity as a trustee, it could be subject to a public record request. So just as a practical matter, either don't email, or if you feel compelled to write an email, be circumspect about it. Better to communicate directly rather than to put something in writing. An email is not informal. It's not informal at all. It is a formal communication, no matter what you put in it, and is subject to possibly a public records disclosure. If you just be careful, you're going to protect yourself and your university when you choose with care how you communicate back and forth with each other and with your chair and with your university or college president.
I can also add to that something my first wonderful board chair shared with me on that particular topic. He said, whenever you write to me or to anyone else, imagine it on the front page of the paper. Would it embarrass you? Would it embarrass your children? Would it embarrass your president? Those are your little questions that you might want to ask yourself. If it does, pick up the phone and make the phone call. Sure.
Thank you. And this is really for all five. I don't know who might answer it, but something you said, Sandy, just several of you, I think, Bob, you mentioned it too. If you have questions, ask, and one of you said get to know the faculty. But I have a sort of I want to ask your advice. What's wrong or what's right with this picture? I had a board member when I was a president who decided that he thought the research enterprise and the IT information technology supporting it probably wasn't as good as it should be. Not ethically compromised, but not as good as it should be. And so he tells me later, a couple weeks later, that he got a friend he thought was an IT expert, and they went to sort of, talk to the faculty and do their own research on this subject. And he was pretty proud of himself because he'd heard a lot of advice at conferences like this that you need to do that. You need to walk around, you need to go check things out. So what's right or what's wrong with that picture?
Well, okay, so since I started it, and then I'm sure everybody has some opinion on this, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And I won't comment on your situation, but I'll give you a live situation with me. We, this past, couple months ago, we had contract negotiations with our faculty. AAUP is the organization that represents them. And it went smoother than any negotiations in the history of the college. Now, the 3 years prior, they went on strike. They went on strike on our president's inauguration day. And so we figured that maybe we ought to do things a little differently. And so what a couple of the board members, me included, decided to do was that we would agree to meet with some of the faculty members, part of the faculty senate. We'd have a couple of administrators there so that if questions came up, we could answer them on the spot as opposed to getting back to them, just to this simply better understand their issues and so that they could better understand our issues. And we had never done that before. At every board meeting, the faculty senate provides a report, they do a presentation, and that's it. We also have different departments come up and do presentations and all that. But it wasn't really getting to some of their real issues. And so, we were able to do just that, better understand what their issues were, and then they would better understand what some of our issues were. We didn't agree on everything, but the things that we could agree on, we did agree on those things. So there's a right way and a wrong way, and just sending people off to start changing programs in the institution is not the way.
Yeah, I would add that the picture you paint wouldn't make it into a juried show. It is not the way a responsible trustee should behave. But that invites me to. That's right, exactly where I was going to go. Because I think what the question raises is what's important about relationships between the board and the president, which is an art. And it is principally a responsibility, I think, of the chair of the board, but it's every board representative's obligation to get it right. The first principle that you ought to understand is the president, man or woman, is your guy. And the board and the university is going to succeed if your president succeeds. Now, if the president gets off the rails or you have problems financially or otherwise, then you may have to make a change, and then we get into presidential searches, and that's a topic of another panel that'll take all day. But the important point is to realize that as was made, the point was made in the earlier panel, that there are pitfalls if you let the president become a Lone Ranger, and I accept that. But that's not really what we're talking about and what responsible boards will allow to happen. But what you need to be able to do is to measure with the president, as, at least in our institution, we ask the president to establish goals for the coming year. We use those goals as a measure for how he did over the course of the prior year, which has to do with his compensation as well as what we do in year 2. We push on him with respect to what is represented in those goals with respect to the vision of the university. Is it the way the board would like to look at the university's future, or should there be other things within his goals? Are they overly ambitious so that it's not something that could possibly be done within any reasonable length of time or budget? Are there other issues that you think that the president has that you as a board need to help him as a critical friend? That's what I think should have happened. And in the case of, well, the rule that we've tried to apply at our institution is no surprises. What I think should have happened is that the board member in question should have come to you and said, look, here's the problem, here's what I'd like to do about it. What do you think? Can we get some experts in to look at this? Can we do it together? Then it doesn't become a we-they, and it doesn't become destructive.
If I could just add to that, too. Everyone wants the board meetings to be very collegial and for, to everyone to get along, and hopefully they will. By the same token, administration wants board members leaving the meeting feeling good about what they're doing. And this sounds trite, but I mean, everyone needs a boss. And in our home building company, I report to a board. Well, what do I tell the board? Only the good news? How great everything is? So they'll just say, great job, great job, great job. Well, I hope I'll do at least that. But I think that one of the things that a lot of institutions suffer from is they feel like the presentations at board meetings should be a lot of cheerleading. When in fact, and there's nothing wrong with a little cheerleading. In fact, it's probably, without it, it's probably really bad. So you need a little cheerleading, I think. But more importantly, you need to know where the warts are. You need to know how you're doing. How is our development function stacking up against the top performing schools? Don't tell me how we're doing against ourselves. Maybe we're not doing very well. So, and I'm using that as an analogy. So I think that the more robust and the more transparent discussions can occur at board meetings where the strengths are not only, celebrated, but the weaknesses are really explored, and how are we going to get better? How are we going to deal with things? If that happens, if you really engage in a healthy exchange of, we're not very good at this, we're getting lapped by Indiana for crying out loud, then what are we going to do about it?
That's right. That's extraordinary advice that you've just been hearing from each and every one of them. I saw a hand go up in the back.
Yeah, could I
Oh,
come?
I'm sorry.
Actually, I was wondering when you're ready to come back to some specifics for trustees. Are you ready for that?
You sure?
Okay, a couple of things that I forgot to mention at the beginning, and that was about new trustees, is to get to know the community that you serve. When you're out, I serve on several boards, and you're out there, I talk up Owens and try to get the leaders acquainted with each other and things like that. I think that's real important to get your name and what you're doing out there. Another thing is for community college trustees is please come into our Ohio Association of Community Colleges meetings. I didn't get involved right away when I became a trustee, and I was sorry I didn't, because it's a great statewide organization. And now that we have Jack Hershey as our CEO, we're doing great things. So I'm putting a plug in there. And also, I think it's really important to attend these chancellors' conferences. You learn a lot. But I would like to tell you about a book that you might like to read. And this is a book that will help you deal with difficult trustees. Maybe some of you have read it. It's called The Rogue Trustee, The Elephant in the Room, and the author is Terry O'Bannon. It's a small book, but it's very, very good, and so I highly recommend that.
Great. I'm going to get that one too. Sandy?
And back to, it's Sheila, right? Back to Sheila's hypothetical.
I thought you were done with that.
No, well,
I'm
no,
sorry.
no. In fact, we'll circle right around to it because I think what you described was a rogue trustee.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah, right. And on that, I will say to you that micromanagement is really easy. It's a lot easier than governance, and many of us are tempted toward micromanagement because it is easier. We'd rather second guess the president, the provost, our CFO. Why didn't you do it this way? Why'd you paint your house yellow instead of white? We like to micromanage because it's easier, but that's not our role. I mean, our role is governance, which is harder. And as far as getting ourselves connected with the community, learning more about faculty members, we still can do that in a governing way and not a micromanagement way. So, for example, at Ohio University, we have a statement of expectations that is our guidance to our board on what we are expected to do, and there's sections on our relationship with the president, our relationship with internal constituencies, our relationship with external constituencies, and we continually revisit this, and our board secretary is sitting back there. Pete is working now with our governance committee to revise the statement of expectation, to keep perfecting it, to keep making it meet our needs, make sure it meets our needs. And on the point that we're discussing, our statement of expectation says that trustees are encouraged to interact. Trustees are encouraged to interact informally with administrators, faculty, and students, bearing in mind that they do so as individual members of the board. They should avoid any statements that would give rise to the perception that they speak for the entire board. So it's important to interact informally, but I'll tell you, if a trustee is out doing an investigation or making statements or expressing opinions or telling administrators or staff or employees or faculty what they ought to be doing,
Or giving press conferences?
or giving press conferences, that is wrong. I mean, that's not our role, and it creates a rift with the president, with the leaders of the institution, and we're not good at it, so we shouldn't be doing it. Now, can we ask questions about it? Absolutely. In fact, another piece of advice I would give you as a new trustee is try to end all of your sentences for the first year with a question mark. Like, don't go in and express opinions because you don't know anything yet. I sure didn't. But continue to ask questions. It's always appropriate to ask questions. That is our role, to hold our senior leaders, our president, accountable by asking the tough questions.
That was a wonderful summary of that particular issue. Thank you, Sheila, for raising it. The hand in the back of the room.
Hi, I'm Diane Radigan with Columbus State. Several of you have mentioned fundraising. Bobby, you mentioned it, Mark, from a community college perspective, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your roles and best practices, things that you found to be effective.
And perhaps your expectations as you appreciate them.
Well, I think that it starts with the chair of the board, and the board chair ought to sit down with the president, because the president reports to the board, but reports directly to the board chair, and there is a clear expectation of fundraising. There's a number, so there's a goal, there's an annual goal. And there is also, we have a session where we break down, okay, how can we find new friends of our institution, number one. Number two, are we appropriately going to those current clients that we have, that we're supplying students to and that are already supporting us? Are there other things that we can do? Are there other things that are of interest to them that we can do? Are they what are they willing to share in that success? And if you don't ask, generally, at least I have found that to be true at our institution, if you don't ask, they don't come out of the woodwork, even if they're thinking about it. And what we have found is that there will be people, institutions that are saying, I wondered when you were going to get around to me. But it has to be intentional. It does involve, I believe, board members, not all the board members. Not all of the board members are good at that or willing to do it, but most of the board members. And as part of the orientation of bringing board members into your institution, it ought to be, hey, we're looking for not only your expertise, but we're looking for resources, financial, and if they're not yours, then do you have access that we can go to? And you know, oftentimes all it takes is to open the door for a relationship to begin. And as all of you know in this room, it's not I come to you and ask you for some funds and then you write a check. It's building the case, building the relationship, showing the value, showing how important it is, if not directly to you, to the community with which you live, and then it takes place. So it's, in my business vernacular, you just keep that pipeline just absolutely full, and then they start dropping.
We were talking earlier when we had our pre-meeting about the fact that Harvard has the largest endowment. And there's other schools that certainly have a history of giving. And it's because they have a culture of giving. And I think that, frankly, and at all of our institutions, I don't mean to be so iron-fisted about it. This is probably going to come out the wrong way. I don't think you should be on the board unless you're willing to be unless you're willing to make a quality commitment to the institution. That sounds heavy-handed, but I think that if I'm a trustee at Ohio State and I'm really not doing much, well, how in the hell can anybody else be expected to? A quality gift may be $100 a year, maybe $500 a year. For someone else, it may have a lot more zeros. I think that we wrote into our statement of expectations at Ohio State, I can't remember, Sandy, you were, I think, might have been involved in helping us do that, that every board member, and it hadn't been written in before, so this is sort of recent vintage, is required to make a quality commitment. And likewise, every board member of the medical center, and every board member of the arts center, and every board member of, to try to help build upon and create this culture of giving. And then the next thing is, and I don't understand the community colleges that well, I apologize, but you can benchmark. And there are institutions that may do it. Like at Ohio State, there were public and private universities that were much better than we were at doing this. So we started comparing ourselves to them. Well, how did they do it? How do we get from number 20 in number of donors to number 2 or 3? And start to create a roadmap for that. And there's a very clear goal at Ohio State now, and that is to become a top 5 university in annual giving by the year, I think, 2020. It was a 5 or 6 year plan, maybe 2019. I can't remember what the end date on that was, but that was something that happened during the last 3 or 4 years. And we're going to hold ourselves to it. And the reason for it is so we can give more scholarships and hold tuition down.
That's right. And there are many creative ways, other than just digging in your pockets, to raise money. One example is, I've got a couple of lawyers right here on this panel. There's frequently large lawsuits that occur. In our particular state, there was a train derailment that caused problems in a particular community. Along with my board chair, we went to some of the lawyers who were going to be making a lot of money off of the lawsuit and asked if they would turn around and contribute it to the university in closest proximity to this particular damage area. It turned out to be a very lucrative ask. It's just something that the creativity of the ask and whom you ask as well as perhaps digging in your own pocket somewhat, can make the difference of extreme success and modest success. I think there was a couple of questions back here.
This is more of a comment than a question, and I am in my 18th year, so I'm not necessarily a newbie. But relative to this item, my eyes were opened a few years ago. Higher education is a failing industry. We're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The whole national and statewide conversation on student success is nothing that's been brought up, and in my mind should be the central item for research for new trustees. I don't know about the university system, but the two-year institutions, when our benchmark in the state of Ohio says that 3 out of 4 students that start don't complete, and you think about the cost to those students as well as to the state that's wasted on those 3 to 4 that don't complete, I really think that our focus should very much be looking at the ball and evaluating operations. And we're going to have to do things dramatically different. Incrementalism won't work. So I really think that for new trustees, get your head wrapped around student success and the issues surrounding it.
I can't echo that strongly enough. We touched on it briefly, but not in the detail that he just brought to our attention, and that is America has no choice but to educate more of our citizens. More and more of us are dependent on fewer and fewer workers, and we have to get more people, give more people the opportunity to work and to work at jobs that are comfortable for them and their families. But even more importantly, you as trustees should be asking the questions that this gentleman just brought up. How are we doing? How are we doing in certain programs? What's the success rate at our universities? And how much does it cost for those students who do not succeed? And do we need to change their patterns? Do we need new pathways for certain students who have come to us with different experiences? I think the community college sometimes has it closest, but there are universities around the country that are doing this very well with the creation of new pathways. Georgia Tech is one of those that I visited. San Diego State is doing something. Arizona State are doing some things that 10 years ago would not even been believable. But the agreement with the students is that when you come in with very poor scores, very little money, and you're going to borrow money from whatever place, whether it's student aid or the institution or a scholarship, the student also has an obligation to follow a certain pattern. And that is, you will take the courses, will help you shape your future, but you'll take the courses that are prescribed so that we can ensure that you're successful. If you cut a class, you may lose your scholarship unless it's a very valid excuse. You have to follow a certain pattern of expectations. Go to class. Get your homework done. Go back to the teacher or your faculty member if you are not able to succeed. Don't take more courses simply because they sound nice. And don't drop an ad because you're not doing well. So there's some institutions that are doing exactly what you suggested. I think that's a conversation in and of itself, because without student success, we all fail. And we are going to have to go after and invite students to our campuses that do not have the proper preparation. We're going to have to ask ourselves, do we have to join with preschool to start them making sure that they're getting the skills they need all the way through? Is it more cost effective to check it at the preschool door than it is at the college door? So you're raising another conversation that should be delved in pretty seriously. I suspect each one of these folks have tasted that at different times.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I mentioned earlier, and that's indirectly begin to understand the funding models. And I would take that a bit further for new trustees. I would carve out time on a regular basis. Doesn't have to be a lot of time. It could be coffee. But to meet on a regular basis with the president, the CFO, the academic vice president, and the president of the faculty senate on a regular basis, so that you can begin to understand a lot of these concepts, especially the issue around student success. It's very complicated, you can't understand it quickly by attending a board meeting once a month or every other month or whatever. You really need to understand this, and if you meet with the right folks, they can help you through that, and you can get different aspects of that issue. It's a big issue, and it's certainly a big issue in our world, in the community college world.
Our time has run out. I hope that you thought the expertise and the experience of these ladies and gentlemen were worth it to you, and if so, let them know it. Thank you.
There he is. I was looking for you. Good morning, everyone. We have a lot to cover today, so we want to go ahead and get started. I'm John Carey, Chancellor of the Ohio Board of Regents, and I want to thank everyone for being here. I see lots of presidents and other dignitaries, but I want to especially thank our trustees for being here. And as I gave the welcome yesterday, I want you to know that our governor is very focused on appointing trustees who have leadership abilities and working with the presidents and the institutions, and feels that the Board of Trustees, the trustees themselves, are very important to the success of higher education in Ohio. And that's one of the reasons why it takes a long time sometimes to get new trustees. So I know that's something that people ask me about occasionally. But the governor wants to be involved with that and choose the best people available, and that's who you are today representing us. Could I ask anyone that's a new trustee to wave their hand? This is your first trustees conference. Well, thank you very much for being here. I know that you did not take the position for the pay, any of you, and many of you have been trustees for many years, and most people don't realize the effort and the time it takes to be a trustee. So on behalf of the governor and the administration, I want to thank each of you for your time and your dedication. Right now is a very exciting time to be in higher education in Ohio. One of the great things about being chancellor is that higher education is a bipartisan issue. Both sides of the aisle realize that higher education is important. It's important for our development as a state and as an individual personally. It's important for our workforce and the economic success of our state. So you will see that that will be a lot of the themes that we talk about as we move into the next budget. The presidents have taken, of the institutions, have taken unprecedented leadership roles in working on the formula for state share of instruction and the capital budget and other issues. And other members of the institution staff have also taken leadership roles in answering questions. And we think that's the best way to govern, is to hear from our institutions, find out what's working for them, and how we can replicate that. So I hope today that you have a chance to visit with your other trustees and other institutions and that you can learn from them. At this time, I want to have you just feel welcome to enjoy the day. We really don't want it to be a very formal process. If you'd like to talk to me about any issue, I'd be glad to visit with you. I didn't bring my checkbook. That's the first thing people ask me for is money, and unfortunately, I don't have any that I personally can provide. If I did, it wouldn't go very far. But we can definitely talk about any issue that you would like to talk about. At this time, I wanted to thank our host, President David Harrison, here at Columbus State Community College. Columbus State has been one of the venues where we've had lots of different meetings. And President Harrison, because of his proximity to the State House, often gets summoned by the governor and other cabinet officials and legislators for his advice and counsel. And he's really represents community colleges specifically and higher education generally well. So let's welcome President Harrison.
Thank you, Chancellor Carey. Good morning, everybody. I want to take a minute to recognize our Chancellor. We are really fortunate to have a great partner and a great advocate going to bat for us, and I have personally benefited from his counsel, and really gives us as presidents great confidence that we can take on big things, knowing we've got such a good partner in the Chancellor's office. So, Chancellor Carey, thank you very much. Welcome to Columbus State Community College. We're delighted to have you here. We love hosting these events. Please walk in like you own the place, because you do. If there's anything that you need, let me or any of our staff know. If you come to me, I'll have to ask our staff how to figure it out. Someone's trying to get connected to internet, to wireless. We can get all that figured out. But seriously, make yourselves at home. We want you to have a productive and an enjoyable day. I want to thank the Board of Regents. I want to thank all of you who are serving as trustees. I want to thank my fellow presidents and other leaders for the work that you do. Whatever was going through your mind when you said yes, when someone approached you about doing this, I wonder if it turned out the way you thought it was going to. These really are interesting times to be doing what we're doing. I was at a presentation recently by a local hospital CEO, and he was rolling out their new strategic plan, and he was talking about the fact that everything they were doing was being changed by external forces. There was more competition than ever. Technology was changing everything that they did, and they were now being compensated on the outcomes instead of inputs. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, "You just gave my speech," because it's the same set of circumstances that we're dealing with. But the work that we do in higher ed has never been more important to our students or to our state. Whether we are working with National Merit Scholars or returning veterans, whether we're helping students start their career or restart their career, or helping them after they've gone through some false starts, we welcome them with open arms in our institutions and help them get where they want to go. So thank you on behalf of our students, and thank you for what you're doing every day to help them be successful.
I would also like to introduce the chairman of the Board of Regents, Vinny Gupta. Chairman Gupta has been exceptional in his leadership, especially regarding commercialization. And one of the things that I've heard other regents say, and it's maybe similar to your story on the trustees, is that sometimes this job can be a full-time job. Chairman Gupta was talking to me about when he first became chairman yesterday. We had a Board of Regents meeting, and basically his first year of his chairmanship, all he did is work on Board of Regents issues and work on commercialization. And we can see the results of that with many of the things that are happening on campuses now. And I truly value his leadership. I'll let him mention that the Regents here today. So let's give a warm welcome to our chairman, Vinny Gupta.
Thank you, Chancellor Carey. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending the Ohio Trustees Conference. It is a great pleasure to see many of you again, and even greater pleasure to meet many of you for the first time.
The microphone pickup is built into this, or just built into the system?
What was that? Am I too close? Before I start, let me recognize some of my members, colleagues over here. I know some of them are on their way. We have Liza Kessler, Regent Kessler, with us over here today. I know Kurt, where are you? Somewhere. I know he's here somewhere. Regent Kaufman, he's here. And then we have Regent Humphreys, who was here yesterday. I think they're on their way. We have Regent Linsett with us, and we have Regent Moreski with us. It's probably the first time that we have 6 of our regents that have attended the conference, all of us together. So let's give them a round of applause for attending and making it possible. A few facts about the University System of Ohio. I'm not sure how many of you know, but it is the single largest comprehensive higher education system in the United States. When I mentioned that, people chuckle. Is it really true? It is true. There are currently over 585,000 students. Let me repeat, 585,000 students that are enrolled in our system in Ohio. And that number is steadily growing. The word is out. Ohio schools offer a stellar education at competitive cost. I know we also have some issues. The reputation of excellence is one to be proud of, but also one with great responsibility. We must live up to the trust that the parents, the students, and future employers put in our education system by managing the system appropriately. To that end, this year, the Ohio Board of Regents has organized special sessions to provide you with an opportunity to network in depth. I know I got some very good comments yesterday, especially some of the newbies that were in this audience yesterday. And Chancellor, I just want to remind you again, this is something that by popular demand, everybody said that we must do it every year. We hope that the result will be a greater pool of innovative ideas and recommendations that infuse all of us with fresh insight as we plan the future of higher education in Ohio. As a member of your school's Board of Trustees, you are an integral part of the system. You are, in fact, the lifeblood of the system. The policies you set, the leaders you choose, and the advisement you provide to your president sets the tone and therefore impacts the future growth of your school. The Board of Regents recognizes the vital role you play, and we are grateful for the privilege of working with each one of you every day in life. As you know, the Ohio Board of Regents has provided several new objectives for ensuring the high standards of our state universities and community colleges. For example, the SSI checks are now formulated based on performance and outcome rather than enrollment. This change alone will require a shift in thinking, guiding, and managing staff. There will be additional changes in the future. There will be mergers, expansions, retractions, and additions. It is vital that we all recognize and prepare for unexpected hurdles that may be part of this exciting future direction. You are likely to be asked to familiarize yourself with the areas of management that you have not previously dealt with, such as student loan and debt, workforce development, cost reductions, outcome improvements, graduation rates, remediation, counseling, innovation and commercialization, physical change challenges, globalization, and that is just the beginning. So on behalf of the Governor, our Chancellor, and my colleagues and members of the Board of Regents, I am here to convey this message. We are here to help. As a board, my fellow regents and I have discussed visiting you on your campus prior to your first board meeting or prior to your meeting. If you find that helpful, you have only to request a visit. We cannot express strongly enough that we are here not to interfere in your governing process, but to gain a clearer understanding of your needs and the role we can play in bringing your plans to fruition. Remember, we all have the same objectives. We are all responsible for making a difference in the lives of the students we serve. Working together, we can continue to enjoy the results of our cooperation as we watch the number of students enrolled in our Ohio schools continue to climb. As we shake hands with employers within our state who thank us for providing well-prepared employees, as we boast of the number of graduates who stay in Ohio after graduation, all of this points to a greater Ohio in the future, and it starts right here in this room. Allow me to end my remarks with my favorite quote, originating from Mother Teresa. We can do things you cannot. You can do things we cannot. Together, we can do great things. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chairman Gupta, and for the regents who are here, our Regent Tom Humphreys from the Youngstown, Warren area just walked in. Welcome, Tom. And again, I want to thank all the regents and especially Chairman Gupta for their help. I also want to thank all the Board of Regents staff that are participating today, and people are complimenting me about the conference and how well it's going. It's because we have very good staff, and our success is very dependent on that. So thank you. Thank our staff as well. One of the things that I want you to be thinking about today as the day progresses is what you'd like to see at next year's Trustees Conference. This year's Trustees Conference is based on input from last year's. And one of the things that we heard last year was what is the role of the trustee and what are the role of the boards? And we're very honored today to have our keynote speaker, Richard Ligon, to talk about that topic. And Richard became the president of the Association of Governing Boards in 2006, and he previously served as AGB's executive vice president and has been with the association since 1983. So I look forward to listening with you about his experience and how we can all improve with our interactions with the boards from whatever perspective that we have. So let's welcome Richard Ligon.
Good morning, everyone. So for the next hour, we're going to ask you to think about one question that was posed a year ago at this conference by Governor Kasich, which is how do we embrace policy changes at our institutions that increase both quality and the value of the services we provide? You know, this is a question that's quite honestly asked every day in America, in corporate boardrooms and CEO offices and amongst project teams, engineers, etc. It has not been a question that has too often been asked together in the world of higher education, is what we found over the last year. Individually, these questions are asked all the time. Everybody has questions about how to increase quality. Many of us have had questions about what do we do to increase value at our institution. The sweet spot of this charge from the governor last year was to find things that meet both. What we did was started with a listening tour across the state. This was the Chancellor and former Ohio State President Gordon Gee went around the state. We listened to presidents, administrators, faculty, staff from public universities, public community colleges, private universities, the for-profit schools. We invited school districts, career counselors, businesses, the general public. We heard a wide assortment of ideas out there of things that fell into this category. Then we had one other piece we needed to add, which was some expertise into our project. We went with the Center for Higher Education Enterprise at Ohio State University. They provided us with a team of graduate students who sort of scoured the research out there to figure out what the great ideas were and to follow up on the ideas that we had heard as we were traversing across the state. Next, the project team went to Seattle for a couple days and spent time with the leadership of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to talk about the best practices they were seeing nationwide, and then went to New York to do the same sort of exercise with the Ithaca Foundation. What we're here to talk about today is twofold. One, give you a little bit of a high-level idea of what it is that generally we heard during this process and the ideas that sort of collectively were started to rise to the top. And then after that, we could turn to our panel. Dr. Steve Johnson from Sinclair University, the president, Dr. Laura Meeks from Eastern Gateway, Dr. Mike Sherman from the University of Akron. Not surprisingly, when we went to these national experts, a lot of them turned around and said, well, you've got really good examples of some of these in Ohio. That shouldn't surprise you, because I think when you talk about these issues nationally, I think people generally consider Ohio one of the top 5 states who's sort of moving in the right direction in this area. So here's what they had to say. First off was that advising matters. The world of academic advising is, I think, legitimately going through a large change right now, a business model change in a way that academic advisors, by utilizing new technology available and new systems in place, can be made to become much more productive and efficient and effective than they have been traditionally. And therefore, the student experience can become much more important to them. Second was summer courses. We heard loud and clear that education is one of the few industries in our country and our world that lets our capital facilities sit largely vacant for 3 months a year. So think of these 2 questions, the answers in your head. If your institution's summer enrollment was the same as it is in spring and fall, 1, how much more revenue would that be in your bottom line? 2, how many more graduates would you be producing per year? The numbers you came up in your head are probably both pretty dramatic, and it underscores why this is a huge opportunity that we should be thinking of, along with our state policymakers, of what are the incentives to do this. We have this academic calendar because we were farmers 100 years ago, and people couldn't go to school in the summer. That's not the case anymore. And so the questions we heard really more focused on, we can't change K through 12. They still have their system, but are there opportunities between the junior and senior year to bring more students into our system? Are there opportunities that the student, when they graduate from high school, should they really take that summer off, or should we jump at them and try to get them into our system immediately? Third thing we heard was competency-based education, which is a growing, I thought it was growing, and then Dr. Meeks told me, no, it was around 20 years ago. It's just gotten popular again. But people are starting to think about it more and more. You're starting to see, from community colleges up to, I think, 3 or 4 members of the Big Ten are now talking about competency-based education. It moves away from time being the constant to learning being the constant. The goal in these sort of programs is to target adult learners. And what people say to us, what we heard from the Ohio people and from the national people is, this is a market of people who largely are not coming to any institution in this room. It is a market for growth out there. They are people who generally don't want to step foot on our campuses. Some do. It's a great It's a great add-on for the people who are there, for the traditional student, but for the non-traditional adult programs, this is a great way to grow our numbers and to grow the number of people in our system. This is what a report card ends up turning around and looking like. It's more, you have a list of competencies. Students can move themselves through it. They've got a very quick and very easy way to monitor their progress. Next was the completion agenda. This is where Ohio, I think, is one of the foremost leaders in our country on this, from performance funding to College Credit Plus to, Stephanie, your directive of the week that comes out to us. Ohio has done a lot of work on this, but it is, it's hand-to-hand combat. This is tough work to do, and it's not necessarily scalable easily. So it's different from different institutions. What works at a public university might not work at a community college. What works for a certain population of students might not work for another. There is a lot of trial and error in this world. You see just from here that, college completion is great amongst high-income people. It is awful amongst low-income people. We have to be more strategic about thinking of how do we drive those numbers up. And finally, the last thing we heard sort of loud and clear was, and some really great examples in Ohio of these are issues that are not solved individually within your own school. Just does not. The great examples of big movement in these areas happen with really deep regional collaborations amongst not only the higher education institutions in the area, but the business community in the area, K through 12 in the area, and the career workforce folks in the area. So that's sort of the high level. We heard a lot of other ideas, probably with additional information coming forward as we wrap up this project. But I want to transition to our other presenters. When we went out to the Gates Foundation, as I introduced Dr. Johnson here, we spent a long time on academic advising. And what they said to us was, this will change college culture if done right. There's a lot of players out in the field who are offering technological solutions to this. And then they said to us, and they're like, well, and Sinclair. And we were like, well, yes, we're familiar with them. And they said, well, they're one of the national leaders in this. We look to them and promote them all the time. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Johnson to talk about really the amazing things that he's been able to accomplish. Yes.
It showed the number of high-income folks.
Yes.
Is my mic on yet? No. Okay. Just a quick question on that. Is this regardless of academic qualifications? I mean, to your knowledge?
Yes, to my knowledge it is.
So in other words, lowest quartile, even if they have good academic qualifications, still, it's generally just 9% that will complete degrees.
Yeah, I mean, I reserve the right to be completely wrong, but
okay.
My understanding is it's an overwhelming variable that trumps many other aspects.
I've seen that before, and it's just such a key thing for all of us to understand across our states. When you're serving nearly 600,000 students, that many of the people you're not serving have very good academic qualifications out of high school, and they're still not likely to finish college. It's a moral issue, really, and I'm glad you brought it up, Jack. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Steve Johnson, president of Sinclair College in Dayton, and it's a pleasure to be here. I want to add my thanks to Chancellor Carey and his staff for making all this happen for us today. It's great to be able to come together. And Dave Harrison, you and your staff here at Columbus State for hosting us. It's a great facility and very convenient and comfortable for us to meet here, so I want to thank you. My comments this morning will be both brief and focused to a large degree on that which the trustees of Sinclair do, and I think what they do is probably in parallel with what you all do as trustees in your respective universities and colleges. And one of the things that we heard yesterday in the session was the idea that trustees need to remember who they're representing. They're not representing presidents, or not representing faculty. They're not, they're representing the public. And one of the things that we work to do across our state is to remember things, things like the Lumina Foundation tells us about completion in Ohio. And our completion of post-secondary credentials in Ohio, apparently, if we're to believe the Lumina Foundation, apparently stands at about 35%. And that 35% is not high enough. It's not high enough to be competitive nationally, or it's not high enough to be competitive globally. And so keeping the eye on the prize, the eye on the ball is to move that completion rate ever higher. And if we are to, again, believe the Lumina Foundation, who does a lot of good work in analyzing demographics and where we're going, we in Ohio appear to be on track to go from 35 to 45% in the next 10 years or so in post-secondary certificate and degree attainment. So 35 to 45 is indeed progress, and it's indeed where we need to be going in that direction, but it's not high enough to be competitive nationally and be competitive globally, because if, again, we're to believe the Lumina Foundation, we need to be at 60 to 65%. So we all need to be pushing for more students, getting more students into college and getting more students out of college successfully with a degree or certificate or credential that matters and allows them to be employable and provide for themselves and their families. Now, the last time I stood at this podium, I told a story. It was a few years ago. I'm going to tell it again. And it's a story about a trustee who, on a very nice day like today, a very nice sunny day like today, goes out for a Sunday drive. And that trustee is going down a country road, windows down, enjoying the day. It's about 35 miles an hour, going down the country road. And as she's going down the road, enjoying the nice country day, a chicken jumps out of the ditch and runs alongside of her car. 35 miles an hour, and that chicken is running right alongside the car and keeping up with the car at 35 miles an hour. So she looks at that chicken running alongside of her car on this country road, nice sunny day, and speeds up to 50 miles an hour, thinking she will outpace that chicken. That chicken speeds up and keeps right up with her. 50 miles an hour, that chicken is running right alongside of her car. So she says, well, this is something. I'm going to go to 70 miles an hour on this country road, and I am going to see what happens, and that chicken speeds up to 70 miles an hour. And they're both going down the road. Picture this, country road, Ohio, nice sunny day, Sunday, a car going down the road, trustee driving, and a chicken running alongside at 70 miles an hour. Speeds up to nearly 90 miles an hour, seeing if that chicken will keep up. But the chicken doesn't. The chicken peels off, runs down a long driveway into a farm, runs behind the farm buildings, and is gone. Zips over there. Trustee slams on the brakes, backs up, drives down the driveway, pulls up to the farm, gets out of the car, and from the farm buildings come a series of people with white lab coats and clipboards, and comes up to the trustee and says, may we help you? And she said, yeah, you're not going to believe what just happened. I was going down the street, going down the road, and this chicken was going 70 miles an hour right alongside of me, and ran down here, and they said, yeah, we know. Come with us. They go back behind the farm buildings. Enclosed pen, big field, thousands of them. Four-legged chickens. And the researchers explain, we have a lot of these chickens, and they're really fast. We have done research, and we have found that the market likes drumsticks. In fact, there's a big market for drumsticks. So we developed a new chicken with 4 legs so that we can meet the market demand of drumsticks. And the trustee said, well, how do they taste? And the researchers said, well, we don't know. We've never been able to catch one. Jack asked me if I was going to tell a joke that would be in any way off color, and it's not against chickens or trustees. But we all have, we're all chasing this 4-legged chicken, I think. And our 4-legged chicken is completion, and we're doing a pretty good job. And we're developing new approaches And so we're developing four-legged chickens to go for completion, to go for better advising, to go for better summer programs, to go for the completion agenda, go for better collaboration. So we're developing good four-legged chickens. Now we just need to catch them, and we need to catch them and get them going for them as intended. And so I think we're half the way there. I think what we have seen across Ohio is a lot of good things. I want to just share with you a few of the things that we're doing at Sinclair. I think they parallel what you're doing. This is probably preaching to the choir to a degree, but bear with me, and I'll be brief, and I'll be gone here. First of all, I just want to call out my bosses that are here. Board Chair Barney Wright is here, with Paula McWin from the Sinclair Board, Danetta Graves, and Dan Sadalier. And I want to thank all the trustees for taking your days, 1 or 2 days here off to be with us as we're working to make Ohio better, as we're working to get college completion rates from 35 to 45 and to 65. The way Sinclair works to organize, and what's important here is that the board works to set a tone and to build a culture and to create an environment that we work within. And this is the environment. It's a very simple model. There is a simple strategic model that the Sinclair board requires me to use. And we report to the board in terms of this model. And that Sinclair is about being ever better in quality and innovation and teaching and learning completion, ever more accessible. That's price, that's location, that's schedule, that's product line, that's service mix, ever more sustainable. We've been around for 128 years. We'll probably need to be around for another 128 years so that we have no debt, no deferred maintenance, those kinds of things, so that we're sustainable and that we can pull our own weight in the community and not be a burden, and that we're community aligned, because we're only as relevant as we are community aligned. The board requires that we do these things. This is our four-legged chicken, and we're doing it. We're chasing this four-legged chicken. Doing these four things simultaneously is very hard. We're chasing this four-legged chicken, and we're catching it. We have taken a look, because the board at their last retreat required this information from us. How are our students doing? We have done over 125, we have implemented over 125 different improvement and reform initiatives at the college in the last 15 years. You see this chart here, and there are red lines underneath the arrows that just show a sample of like 5 or 6. But there are 125 different things, most of them pilot projects. Most of them pilot four-legged chickens or three-legged chickens or whatever they were. And the question is, what has happened to our students? The board requested this information, thorough information about what happens to our students. So we provided this longitudinal study to them about what happened to our group of 1998 over 5 years, 2003 over 5 years, 2008. When we looked at the cohorts, and the question is, are we moving in the right direction? And the answer to that question is, the first cohort, 30% of the students at Sinclair, either over the course of 5 years, those that were with us in 98, by the time we got to 2000 and end of 2002, where were we with them? 30% in that first cohort we looked at, 30% either got a certificate, a degree, transferred, or were still in good academic standing with us and making progress. By 2003 and 2007, we moved to 46%. We have now moved to 56% in the latest cohort, which isn't good enough. We're going to go to the 60s, and then we're going to go to the 70s, and then we're going to go to the 80s. How do we get there? We have annual retreat with the trustees. We focus on strategy. We have an annual Future of Higher Education Symposium with the trustees. We're focused on the future. We have committees of the trustees that focus on strategy. We have staff reports that are organized around that foursquare: quality, access, sustainability, and community alignment. We participate in a number of national reform initiatives. For example, Accelerate IT is a performance-based funding, not performance-based funding, but I have performance-based funding on the mind and on the brain here. It is a competency-based education method that we're in partnership with Western Governors University, Broward Community College, and Austin Community College to accelerate IT education. We are working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on improving developmental education, Connect for Completion and City Connects. The important thing is this is driven by the board. The board has said, we want you to seek as many of these partnerships in the state and across the nation that will cause us to improve in all areas of our Foursquare. We call it our Foursquare, 4 areas. That was board-driven and continues to be board-driven and reported to the board in terms of our strategy. So I'm going to conclude here with this thought. We have found, and I think this is consistent with what you have found in your respective colleges and universities, that students don't do optional. So as we're catching that four-legged chicken and we're making it real, we know our students aren't doing optional, that we need to be more prescriptive with our students. It's not just about money. We can't just throw money at the issue, and it's not just about academics for our students. It's not just about academic preparation only. Our students have other issues other than just being prepared. They do have academic issues, but it's not just that. We have found that case management, talk about advising, we found that case management works. It's hard to scale. It's hard to scale for us. Everyone has a role. Trustees have a role. Janitors have a role. Everybody from left to right has a role in that. This is a culture change and an iterative process. It's not something that you go to a seminar and do overnight. It's not something you do over 1 year. It's working with the board, working with administration, working with the faculty staff, and it's a 10-year, 15-year process, but it does work, and there's no silver bullet. I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Laura Meeks. Laura and I talked just before we did this. I asked her if she had any PowerPoint. She said she did not. But then I just wanted to assure her that all of my slides were inspired by her. So.
Thank you. You don't need an inspiration. I am also pleased to be here with you, and I think I've been asked to speak because we're a small college trying to grow, but growing really in our understanding of how important it is to focus on the most important outcome that we have as board members and presidents, as faculty and staff, and that's to make sure that our students learn. And it's taken me a long time to realize that that's what we're all about. It's solely about learning, and I mean that. Our journey to become an evidence-based learning college started really, I think, when the Gates Foundation several years ago picked 5 colleges in Ohio, only 15 in the nation, to start studying developmental education. If my memory is correct, Tri-C, Zane, Sinclair, North Central, and our college was where we were chosen. And we learned how to do I would call it individualized competency-based education for developmental education students. And at that time, our faculty learned how to do that also. And I thought, well, this is great, because I was familiar with that. I had learned that when I was a teacher a long time ago. But I thought, well, this is great. You know, something that I believed in a long time is coming back. And I really believed in that method of teaching. But I found out that over time, you don't get changes by having faculty work alone. You must have a board that's committed to being a learning college. And we were 5 years ago, as we became Eastern Gateway Community College, we had 11 board members. And these 11 board members shared very strongly a common belief system in access, equity, and affordability. And they made that known very clearly as they began their work together. We serve a 4-county service district, Columbiana, Mahoning, Trumbull, and Jefferson counties. And 70%, over 70% of our students are, they qualify for financial aid. Our motto is better education, better life, and I know you all understand that. I love that theme. Maybe it's because I'm a daughter of a truck driver and my mother washed dishes in a nursing home. So I understand what it's like to be a community college student. Our goal is very simple. It's to help people get jobs, whether they graduate with an associate degree or certificate, or we encourage them to go on and transfer to get a job in a professional rating. All of our students are with us because they want to get a better job. And a recent Gallup book shows that they did a world study. And guess what the most common goal is of every family in the world? To have what they consider to be a good job. So how do we do this as a board? How did the board come together to guide our college? First of all, they attended the Gates Foundation's GISS interventions. The OACC hosted these, and boards learned about evidence about their colleges through a culture of evidence to support learning outcomes. Our board had earlier seen one of our scorecards. I left one on the table, and there aren't enough for everybody, but about 8 years ago, our college, through the Achieving the Dream, I learned how to make a scorecard, a dashboard indicator, and I thought that sounded great because I've never worked in business, but it was kind of business adapted. So we started doing one for developmental ed, and then both Steve and I are he's really on a large committee of the Voluntary Framework of Accountability from the American Association of Community Colleges. I was also on a committee. We started realizing that scorecard could be used for other strategies for the college. So when the new board saw this scorecard, they said, you know what? We want to use that scorecard to put all of our strategic initiatives on one card, and we want to see it at every board meeting. We want to have benchmark indicators based on benches from iPad surveys from colleges that are like us. So the board establishes with us benchmark indicators, and at every board member meeting, we check our progress. Now, I'm not bragging about this card. You know, if the press is here, they could see that our graduation rate isn't what it should be. You see those red indicators, that means that we did not meet our benchmark. That's not the point. The point is that we know what our benchmark is, and we're working toward that as a institution. And this is widely shared with faculty, staff. One of those is called course completion, and another one is called gateway courses. Gateway courses are those courses where many students are enrolled and many fail. So faculty don't like to have a course that they're involved with be on that list. It's not by teacher, it's by course. But it really makes a difference when you're charting those barriers that students reach in finishing their grid on their pathways to getting a degree or certificate. And those are charted over time on a different format that we use for the faculty. The board at every meeting also has designed a benchmark scorecard for the board's interaction. So they hold themselves accountable, and every board meeting they check their own progress on a board of trustee outcome. I would just mention to you a couple of things on that benchmark indicator that you see. To increase the number of African American students who graduate, we have in our one of our centers, we have 67% of our 2,000 students are African American. So now I'm getting down to the bottom line. When we're the fastest growing college in Ohio, I believe. And we're small, but we're growing quickly. And we also are the 16th fastest growing college our size in America. So when we were funded on FTE growth, our shares of subsidy we could have celebrated, hey, we're going to get the most. But when our subsidy changed to 100% based on performance indicators, and I'm very proud to say that I'm from the state of Ohio, and I say that nationally when I meet with others, Ohio is an absolute trailblazer in performance outcome relating to learning. Do you know that our college actually did better? When we compared our subsidy to the benchmark, we scored 1.29% of subsidy on FTE, but when we put all the indicators together that we've been working on for 8 years, our subsidy went up to 1.39. So I say thank you for the subsidy indicators based on performance. Thank you to Achieving the Dream and the William Gates Foundation, because for 8 years we've been working on this. Our board also changed the mission of our college to include learning. It had been omitted. Our board has 4 committees, one of which is a very powerful committee called the Student Success Committee. And each board meeting, the scorecard is shared, but also disaggregated data regarding those indicators. We don't do every indicator at every board meeting, but our board members receive disaggregated data about those. Now, I would like to close my remarks just briefly in about 2 minutes. Culture change isn't easy. 8 years ago, when we do a Noel Levitt's employee satisfaction survey, in addition to doing several student satisfaction surveys to make sure we're on target with our indicators regarding students, we have 4 different ones. We use Noel Levitt's and SESI, and then we started a new one this year. For our faculty and staff, we use the Noel Levitt's Employee Satisfaction Survey. 8 years ago, one of the questions that I look at is, what's the most important thing for the improvement of our college? 8 years ago, it was to improve college morale. Now it's, for the last 2 years that we've done it, it's the same. It's to improve student retention. To improve student retention. You talk about a culture change, and how did that happen? It happened because a group of board members really are convinced. They know what our job is. It's to help students learn and to get jobs. Now, I would like to, I think I have a minute and a half left maybe. Our board puts its money where its mouth is too. Our average class size is the lowest in the state. I'd like it to be higher because I don't think there's a lot of evidence that shows that you learn better in a small class, but ours is 15. But our board has a very entrepreneurial spirit. For example, we keep to our Common Core. We spend our money on learning. We hire coaches for academic coaches. We hire advisors. We added some new full-time faculty positions. And how do you do that? We don't run our own wellness center. Someone else does that. I'm not going to give you all the examples, but we don't have our own security. A private security company does that. We don't have our own child care anymore that we were losing money on. Someone else does that for us. And we don't even have our own career services department for us anymore. The Ohio Means Jobs comes on our campuses, and they do our career services for us so that we have money related for other things. When I gave these and we partner, of course, with universities like YSU to provide an expensive power plant operator program for them. Southern State, where are you? Thank you. You're teaching truck driving for us, so we didn't have to start a truck driving program. I gave some of these examples at Ferris State University, and Noah Brown, who's the American Association Community College trustee leader, said, "Hey, Laura, I've got a quote for you. I think I made it up and you can use it." Here's what he said. "Can you continue to do more with less? Or, by focusing on student persistence, can you do less with more?" And I think that's exactly where we are today. We are benchmarking ourselves with the University of Phoenix. And we found out that through our competency-based education that we learned through the Gates Foundation, we have significantly moved the needle on developmental outcomes. And I could tell you that in 2011, 66% of our students had a C or above in English. Now they have 73%. And in developmental math, that number was 54%, and today it's 77%. And the students who finish these courses, because of the high level of competency base from the Pearson Company, my math lab and my English lab, are more successfully completing college algebra because they're better prepared. So with the technology of Pearson Corporation, through some of their coursework, Course Connect and ProPiro, through our faculty who have learned a long time ago how to individualize instruction, we are going to be leading soon with an online degree for working adults. America's working adults are not attending community colleges like they used to. So we're going to compete with the University of Phoenix through a partnership we have with Higher Education Partnership. They're helping us with our advertisement. And starting spring, we're coming out with a self-paced, individualized, competency-based online degree for our students. And I would like to say that gap, I know I'm talking too long, but this will be my last one, I promise. Our faculty at one time on the course success, they thought, I know why our success rates aren't high enough. It's because our online students aren't doing as well. And they were right. We did a study and there was an 8.1% gap in the success rate for online classes. But because our faculty have been working really hard on improving that gap, we now have a 2.5% gap. Our online students are averaging a success rate of C or above at 71.2%. So we're very confident in this online degree, and I just want to say, just focus on what's important and it's learning, and it'll make you really happy. It's made me happy for 44 years. Thank you.
morning, everybody. I'm sure we're all happy because we're all focused on student success. I would imagine almost everybody in this room has in their strategic plan, if not the number one priority, it's certainly number two, student success. And in the Northeastern Ohio, we're fortunate to have a group of colleges come together through the Northeast Ohio Council on Higher Education. Our chair of the board, Mr. Dick Pogue, has played an instrumental role in assuring the continued excellence of this council in Northeastern Ohio. He's helped keep it relevant, connected, and he's helped the institutions, this council has helped the institutions be more productive as well in Northeastern Ohio. As you can imagine, we come together to focus on, to collaborate on degree attainment. We come together to focus on and advocate that higher education is a stimulus for regional economic sustainability. On the slide are the member institutions for this year. All the institutions in the council come together as presidents, come together as provosts, come together as student affairs officers, and that's how we work together to collaborate to improve educational attainment and regional economic prosperity in Northeastern Ohio. In about 2009, the CEOs for cities went around the country, having done a lot of work to analyze what makes cities prosperous, what contributes to the prosperity, the economic sustainability of cities. And they confirmed, as many other studies have done, that 58% of a city's success as measured by per capita income, that's 58% of a city's success as measured by per capita income, can be explained by the percentage of the adult population with a college education. That's pretty impressive. That's what we're all about. And the CEOs for cities at that point in time decided with the Lumina and the Kresge Foundations to create the Talent Dividend Prize. And that is a $1 million prize that would go to the metropolitan statistical area across the country that would have the greatest increase in degree attainment from 2009 and 10 to 2012 and 13. $1 million prize for what it is we get together to do each and every day. Serendipity, I would say. The council decided that it would apply as 3 MSAs, the Cleveland MSA, the Youngstown MSA, and the Akron MSA. The Akron MSA includes Summit County, Portage County, and our good collaborators in Stark County. We agreed from the very beginning we wouldn't let the money get in the way, because we agreed that $300,000 of the prize, should we win, would go to the collaborative of the Northeastern Ohio Council. And then the MSA that would win would decide how to split the remainder of the award. Each of those MSAs put together a steering committee and worked in their MSA towards what it is we do each and every day, serendipity again, to improve degree attainment. Now, NOCHI in 2009 started its own steering committee for talent development. And as a region, we established our goals and objectives for talent development, degree attainment for Northeastern Ohio. So what has happened is since 2009, Northeastern Ohio has 92,000 more 2-year and 4-year degree holders, up 10.3% to almost 1 million, and the regional attainment rate is up 2.8 percentage points to 31.7. The state average is about 35.5. Why is this important? Well, this is important because for 1% increase in degree attainment in Northeastern Ohio, it's equal to about $2.8 billion in increased per capita income. $2.8 billion in increased per capita income. For the United States, get this, it's $1.24 billion $124 billion. So a significant impact and influence on regional sustainability, regional economic development. For the Akron MSA, which includes, again, Summit County, Portage County, and Stark, a 1% increase in college attainment per capita increases annual income by about $717, and that's about $506 million benefit to the Akron, the Stark, and the Kent, the Portage County MSA. Across the 2009, 2010 to 2012, 2013 time period, the Akron MSA increased the percentage of those achieving a post-secondary degree more than 56 other MSAs in the country. So we had the great fortune, again serendipity, of sharing in the prize, first sharing it across northeastern Ohio, then we shared it with our educational continuum partners, and then we shared it amongst the 4 institutions that participated in the MSA, Kent State University, Northeastern Ohio Medical University, Hiram College, and the University of Akron. How did we do it? Well, we did it basically with the findings of the study that President Yee coordinated by doing all of these things, which I'm sure most every institution here has focused on in one way, shape, or form. I'll just focus on one of those, and I'll focus on this because this was a strategy of those 4 institutions for the Akron MSA, and that is what we called GAP scholarships. The Kresge Foundation gave each MSA $25,000 to use. Our MSA decided we would use it for GAP scholarships. Our institutions matched that $25,000 at each institution, and each institution then decided what a GAP scholarship would be defined as. Most institutions define their GAP scholarship as individuals within 2 semesters of graduation with good academic performance, an indication of economic need on the basis of FERPA and other indicators, and they needed between $300 and $1,000 to complete. In other words, to get out the door. Think about it. We spend all kinds of time and energy getting them in the door, scholarshiping them in. This is really the end game. How do we get them out? And we really think that this approach contributed in a very significant way to our ability to improve degree attainment in more than 56 other MSAs across this country. And with that, Jack, I will finish.
So we have a little time for questions left over. I know conference etiquette means nobody's going to stand up immediately and ask a question. So I'll ask one to get us started while you all rush towards the microphones. The things talked about, in the under the banner of quality and value, and I think a lot of the things that Governor Kasich has asked higher education to do under his tenure have been pretty big transformational changes. So what's the right role, in your estimation, having lived through some of these, of a Board of Trustee member in supporting a president and an administration while implementing really big dramatic change? And maybe what's the role in when it fails, first off? Not that it's going to fail, but big transformational change is sort of an iterative process. And how do you keep the momentum going? Oh,
stop. The question's getting longer and more complicated. So thanks, Jack. Briefly, I think the trustee role is to participate as an individual in the group process in providing oversight and guidance and steering for the institution. Obviously, I think we continue to establish and reestablish that. In the case of all that is now going on, the world is changing very rapidly for us in higher ed because the world is changing rapidly for everyone, and we just reflect that. The trustees' role in requesting accurate, thorough, and timely information about what the results of the operations are very important. I think the trustee role in also, there are probably 5 or 6 things. I'm going to stop with this and turn it over to my colleagues. But the trustee role in creating an environment where experimentation and attempts are embraced, and failure is not seen as failure and punished, but failure is seen as learning, as long as we continue to learn from our mistakes. So a good environment to allow us to experiment, because we are working to create a new path that our predecessors had not achieved yet. And so we're trying to achieve something that has not been achieved before.
I would totally agree with patience, because it takes a long time to move that needle. It takes a lot of trying and failed attempts sometimes, like oil wells. You don't always hit wet when you dig your first well. So patience is very important, but I've learned, I think it's my role, I just assume this role, and it's the same success story with board members as it is with faculty and staff. When, for example, the new subsidy model was going to be, was thought about, you don't wait, you show it to people right away. You get people ready. You show people reality. This is the reality. And let people help get ready for it. So I'm a realist, and when things change, like, we've been warned for years that someday if you don't become outcome-based based on learning performance, the legislators are going to do it to you. That's 20 years old. Well, you know what? We've had a lot of warning. So it isn't hard to convince board members and faculty that change is coming, but you really do need to help them know as much as you can about that change. So information is real important in times of change.
Any questions? We gave you a long time to think about some. Mike, can I ask you to talk about when we did our listening tour? I thought what came across is the University of Akron had spent a lot of time thinking about summer enrollment and increasing summer enrollment. Could I ask you to talk about that for a few minutes, about sort of the strategies you've looked at?
Sure. Well, first off, it's helping the faculty understand what we offer in the summer is to the good and the benefit of the students. And that takes a lot of time and effort and energy and discussion. We have found that decreasing competition amongst units to teach courses is the way to go. So we've tried to decrease the redundancy of courses that count towards particular parts of gen ed, so that there is more enrollment in particular sections. So that's one strategy we've used. I think many of the institutions use bridge programs where they bring in individuals prior to the start of the semester, orient them to the institution in different ways that have been found to improve their success. We've attached what we call a Zip Start program to our Choose Ohio First Scholarship program, where students actually come in and I think it's over a 5-week period, earn course credit towards the course that they would find to be their most difficult course. So we make sure that they're successful taking their most difficult course before the semester actually starts. So those are just a couple of examples.
Jack, I want to, assuming there's no other questions, I do want to comment on something else about trustee role, but also president's role, administrator's role, all of our role in this endeavor. And I'm actually reacting to our sessions yesterday, which were good sessions, and they were focused on the fiduciary responsibility of trustees and some other things. But just as a comment, sometimes, and I might be stating the obvious here, but sometimes it feels like we focus too much on the avoidance of fraud, waste, and abuse. And so just as a comment, it's like it's easy for us to get into that, like, you know, making sure that the trustees are monitoring the president or the president is monitoring the institution, and all that. So it might be a little bit of a non sequitur, but since we had this lull, I wanted to say that the avoidance of fraud, waste, and abuse, as we talked about essentially yesterday, and as we get into some of this, and in the Chronicle of Higher Education today, top story is the amount of regulations that higher education is now being burdened with. I mean, they're growing in all areas. So it's easy to confuse achieving that avoidance with moving forward on these things that we're talking about here in this panel. Mm-hmm. And so I just caution that we keep focused on innovation and experimentation. And so we asked about the role of trustees and talk about patience. It's like not to have the boards get too much into only the avoidance of fraud, waste, and abuse, but be focused on innovation.
One thing we're doing in our Mahoning Valley to improve the summer enrollment is we have a consortium called the Eastern Ohio Educational Partnership. It used to be called P16. And we've come together on two major issues. One is focus on early connections. There's a crawl score that kindergarten students take, and there's a correlation, a predictive analytic that shows if you get a 19 on that crawl score, your predicted ACT score will be 21. So what we're trying to do in the Mahoning Valley is infuse support so that students are prepared for kindergarten and they can get a crawl score that's close to 19. And the other thing we're doing that relates to summer is that we're trying to get more students to fill out the FAFSA. Right now, 46% of the seniors in the Mahoning Valley fill out a FAFSA before they graduate, and 73.43% would qualify for federal aid. In our college at Eastern Gateway, we do give a grant of free tuition for 2 years to any student who has a C+ or above. So it's really important that we all join hands, and with Youngstown State and Kent, to get these students to fill out their FAFSA, because some of them think they can't go to college because they don't have the money. So I really think that getting people enrolled in summer school by first making sure that they fill that FAFSA out early is a very smart strategy. And one other thing we know is that students who enroll late do not have predictive analytics again, have a less successful chance of succeeding if they enroll early. So they need to register early. So that's something we all could do.
Question.
Hi, Dave Stone again. So there's a lot of follow the leader. I'm following the President of Sinclair's comments. There's a lot of follow the leader in higher ed because we set fairly short-term time horizons and we feel like we need to meet attainable and visible goals as opposed to spending a lot of time looking around the next corner. But for citizen boards and community board members who aren't higher ed experts, how do we build capacity so that those strategic planning retreats can actually result in new thinking and new ideas, as opposed to lots more follow the leader?
One of the most important things to have the retreats. The number of boards that don't have strategic planning special days or weekends or special periods of time is remarkable, and I'm talking about nationally remarkable. So I think when you ask the question, how can citizen boards get up to speed, they have to have those kind of meetings, and the staff need to work in partnership with the trustees to build an environment and a culture, an interactive culture of being as strategic as possible and not get sucked into the weeds of this short-term issue or that compliance concern, and to build a horizon. So it's something, and it takes time, but it needs to be then embedded in the board meetings and in the retreats and all that. Just some ideas.
Well, our time is about up. I want to conclude by saying a few things. I hope this gave you sort of got your creative juices flowing about how you would answer individually the question of what are you doing on your campus to increase quality and value. This is a question that was asked to us by the governor in a very serious way a year ago. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to have an answer to that question. I think what we learned over the year is that the answer is going to be different for every campus in the state, and that's probably appropriately different because these are complex issues. But I do think it's in all of our best interest to think this through and have our questions ready for, or our answers ready for the governor and the chancellor when this report is officially released. And so with that, I thank you for listening and give a round of applause to our panel. Did a great job.